Good evening. I'd like to call to order our Town of Sidney regular council meeting on Monday, October 23rd at 6 p.m. Hello to council colleagues. On my far right, Councillor Duck, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Garnett, myself, Mayor McNeil-Smith. To my far left, Councillor Novek, Councillor O'Keefe, and Councillor O'Toole. Good evening to members of staff in the chamber this evening, and good evening to members of the public and our presenters, both in the chamber this evening and those who may be watching the live web stream. I want to provide a territorial acknowledgement that we are holding this evening's meeting in the territory of the Wasanish Nations, and we express our gratitude for their stewardship of these lands for millennia. In turning to approval of the agenda, we have three items that we've received since the agenda was published last Thursday. I'll note those items and they will be considered received when we approve the agenda. The first is we have a written report from Councillor Duncan under 11A. The second is we have a letter from, let's turn to the back here, from Mr. Moffatt regarding under item 13A. That item will appear then. And under correspondence for information, under item 15.6, in the agenda package is the letter from Albion Properties, and staff did provide a response to that letter, and it is dated October 20th and will form part of that correspondence. And I would then look for a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
I'd like to amend the agenda, please. If I could raise from correspondence for information 15.1 to correspondence at 14.1.
Yes, we will raise that item to correspondence to 14A. Is there any other items under correspondence to be raised this evening? Seeing none, if we could have a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved as amended.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. We're now turning to public participation opportunities. In just a moment, we will go forward with our regular public participation period, but I wanted to note for members of the public who may be here tonight to wishing to speak with regards to the development application at 2180 Beacon Avenue West. We will, it's not on the agenda, but I would now seek a motion for council to add a special public participation period after the presentation we have under item 4D1.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor O'Toole.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Duck. All in favor? That motion carries. So with that, to members of the public, if there's anyone wishing to come forward in our open general public participation period to speak to any other item apart from 2180 Beacon Avenue, please come forward now. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. David Calveley. I am a resident of Sidney, but I'm speaking to you this evening as a director and a representative of the Sidney Community Association, an item that's now on the agenda. Our president, who would normally be here to speak, is away on a well-earned vacation in France and asked me to appear as the representative. And the Sidney Community Association would like to extend its thanks to council members who attended the annual general meeting on September 24, and in particular to the mayor, who took time on a weekend, Sunday, to provide some very interesting update information concerning the activities and achievements of this council since their election a year ago. And you've certainly been busy. After our meeting, we received several appreciative comments about those remarks, but there were also questions as to why don't we have town hall meetings for all residents with questions and answers, perhaps in the same manner as Elizabeth Bay did pre-COVID. We could imagine a town talk detailing various items that are of interest, various options for discussion, followed by some advertising. At the formal AGM, members discussed the number of plans currently existing at the town of Sidney and how they're considered by council during their annual strategic plan review. We know that certain items are referred to strategic planning during the year, from various council meetings. And we understood from the Mayor's description of the process at our meeting, whereby additional strategic priorities are also suggested by staff, based presumably on the current status of the various plans, but there's no public input prior to that session. And as detailed in our letter that is before Council this evening, members at the AGM then passed the following resolution unanimously. And unfortunately I'll read it, that the Sydney Community Association requests that the Town of Sydney consult with the community prior to developing the upcoming strategic plan. As an aside, this request was made earlier in the year during public participation opportunities at council meetings by both Dennis Carlson and by me. Hopefully this resolution will add some weight to our previous words. I don't know if the decision has yet been made whether the strategic planning meeting will be in camera or at least open to the public. As a personal aside, I hope it will be open to the public. Information about the Town of Sydney Parks Master Plan of 2018, gathered by SCA board members and some volunteers, was presented at the AGM as an example of a town plan. It wasn't possible to review all plans, but we felt that we should look at this one as being representative. We could find no status available on the town's website, and so we conducted our own survey over a number of days, a number of hours, for all of us, and finding that only a few of the items identified as short-term items, those for 0 to 3 years, had actually been started or completed. Now, it was emphasised, and I want to repeat the point here, that no criticism of town staff and their maintenance of our parks was expressed or intended. Indeed, it was well commented that we'd like to be on record as congratulating that team for exceptional work, particularly on the waterfront. It is a status of the plan as an example of the overall situation that we were more interested in, not just the parks plan, but does that apply to all plans? However, the members at the AGM then passed the resolution unanimously that the Sydney Community Association requests that the Town of Sydney provide an update on the status of the implementation of the recommendations contained in the Town of Sydney Parks Master Plan of 2018 to the community as a whole. And one would hope that eventually a status of all the town's plans could be made public. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Calveley. With regards to your note on town halls, it will be something council will consider. And with regards to the two resolutions contained in the letter, we will consider those and speak to those under that agenda item tonight. So thank you for coming forward.
Thank you very much.
I'll call for a second time if there's anyone wishing to come forward to speak to items other than 2180 Beacon. And for a final time, anyone wishing to come forward? Seeing none, I will close the general public participation period and we'll now turn to item 4D1, which is the rezoning application number RZ100104 and development permit application number DP100838 at 2180 Beacon Avenue West to construct a 5-story multi-unit residential building containing 140 apartment units. I'd like to invite Dean Strontham, the representative of the applicant, to come forward and make your presentation. Mr. Strontham, are you planning to speak for more than 10 minutes in your presentation this evening?
I will. I know that's the limit. I'll try to go through these slides very quickly to the 10 minutes.
Okay.
That's not.
Just let me know and I'll switch.
Okay. I have help.
Yeah, we're not formally clocking you on this. We will be mindful of the time and if we need to extend the presentation period, but we'd also be pleased if you would take questions from council members after the actually after your presentation. We will have the special public participation. So just for members of the public who may be in attendance, and we do have a speaker online to speak, that we will have the presentation We will then turn to the special public participation, where members of the public can make comment, can ask questions of the applicant, or may make a comment to council, and then we will turn to council questions, Q&A with the proponent. The item will come up for deliberation on council after we address a couple of other agenda items. So, Mr. Strongthorn, you have the floor.
Is the mic on? Yes, please.
Sorry, just a button for the red.
The red is on. Sorry about that.
Sorry, can we just turn the screen if it does move just a little further? Thank you.
Oh yeah, I guess it's over here.
Yeah, if it comes out a bit. Thanks, Mr. Emma.
Yes, Mayor McNeil Smith, members of council, my name is Dean Strongatharm, and in the audience with me today is the architect Joe Nill and landscape architect Brad Forth. Somewhere in the internet also is Andy Zoe and Anupam Kathari, who are watching it from afar and express their regret for not being able to be here. You've seen some of this has been before you a while ago. There's been a lot of things that have happened in between. It was an opportunity to update council in terms of what has evolved. And again, I think it's very evident. Everybody knows where it is at the corner of Beacon and the Pat Bay Highway. And again, a summary, it's an application for 140 units, which would require rezoning of the site, which is generally flat in terms of its characteristics. What is proposed is a 5-story building with more than half of the parking underground under the building. It doesn't extend beyond the outside footprint of the building in terms of the underground parking. And I'd say more than half of it is. And in terms of the Sydney's housing needs study, which was now done a couple of years ago at least, certainly there was a shortage in housing and rental housing in particular. And of course, more recent, there's been a lot of information coming out of the provincial government in terms of its mandate to encourage more housing within the province. I can see I've even got a painter here, goodness gracious. I didn't realize that. Now I have to steady my hand. So once again, you can see in the red where the site is, and I think it's significant just to re-emphasize the fact that it is right beside a very significant employment hub, which is easily walkable, whether it's to the airport lands in terms of the actual airport itself, whether it's the Amazon or the other large warehouse sites that are in the vicinity. And so therefore, in terms of its proximity to that employment hub, it's very significant, as well as its proximity to the ferry terminal and BC Transit routes to downtown, and then the other things in terms of access to public recreation, community services, commercial services, and so on. So I think it's significant in that regard in terms of the significance of the site. I won't totally repeat this, but this is an excerpt out of the planning report that your council has received within the last couple of days in terms of its consistency with the official community plan, which also does permit on this site up to 6 stories. Again, I won't belabor this other than, once again, if you look at the FAR, floor space ratio, floor area ratio, it comes in at about 1.68 to 1 over a 2-acre site, which certainly in many of the projects I have is certainly not high density, and that is after the road dedication. I think the significant thing here are twofold. Number one is that the number of units that are actually 2 and 3 bedroom units. Very, I won't say extremely unusual, but actually uncharacteristics for many projects that I'm involved with or other projects I've seen. And the other thing is just in terms of unit sizes. Those unit sizes, compared to many projects that I'm even involved with, the unit sizes are larger in terms of the spaciousness of the units. Going back in terms of the evolution of it, and I won't belabor each line item, but just in terms of the process that has gone on over the course of the last couple of years, I guess, actually, getting to the point to where we are today and the changes that have been made over the course of that time. Make sure I get the right one. And then I'll just go through these very quickly. Kind of the key changes. When the original application came in, we received some feedback. Sorry, I should keep up with the mic. Received some feedback with respect to input. Changes were made directly to those considerations that we received, including further articulation of the building, making sure that the impacts on neighbors was mitigated, moving things because of more sunlight, and many other things that were done. Subsequently, there are additional items that working with staff and others in terms of feedback that we've received. There are additional items that have been done with respect to confirmation of the dedication of Beacon Avenue, the confirmation of the road frontage and the statutory rights-of-way, the redoing of number 2, redoing of the pedestrian pathway, which will include actually and be paid for is the looping of the water main. Number 3 is changing the secondary access to make it at that request of staff for cautionary purposes at some time in the future, if there was a requirement to change the access in, that it would actually be made ready for that. Right now, the access is right in and right out off of Beacon Avenue, as you can see over at the southwesterly corner of the property. Again, some of the feedback that came in terms of getting access from Jahn Place to the multi-use trail along Beacon Avenue. Item 5 actually shows where that would be an easement that would be granted, so they can get public access right from Jahn Place and from those areas, obviously west of Jahn Place through to the multi-use pathway along the highway. And finally, again, in some discussions, we've also had changes to some of the landscape planning and an extension of the rain garter system all the way along Beacon Avenue, and an enhancement of the landscaping along there, once again in response to some comments that were received. Let's see if I can do this. Other key things, non-architectural or non-building related. We heard comments received from this council actually, and others, just in terms of the length of the guaranteed rental period and the length of the below market rents, and so they were increased. We first came forward with 10 years, and now we're looking at a minimum 30-year rental period and a minimum of 20 years of below market rents. In terms of community benefit, we've agreed that there would be 20% of the units would be the 20-20-20 rule. 20% of the units would be 20% below market, distributed throughout the actual makeup of the units, meaning the distribution of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. So they weren't strictly limited to 1 bedroom, which often is the case. We did do what I thought was a conservative present. I think it's in your presentation, present value of what that actual cost is or contribution is. And as you see, using only a 2% interest rate, which would likely be more now, it comes to about a $3.08 million present value of that lost revenue in terms of being able to draw down on that 20% below market. That is significantly above what the community amenity contribution policy is with the town, which would have equated to about a $1.75 million contribution in various forms. And that, but in addition to that, and being significant, given that this is a rental building, it's not a condo building, and there is a significant economic difference between condo pro formas and rental pro formas. But there is also a request, knowing that it is in the local area plan for a deficit in Parkland in the west side, and staff has asked for a significant increase in what is the current DCC, which would have amounted to $34,000 for parkland dedication to $242,000. In addition to that, there's approximately, and these were just rough estimates prepared by our civil engineer, of about $55,000 for doing the water main replacement and replacement of the pathway that leads from Jahn Place to Beacon Avenue that exists currently. Improvements to the Jahn Place road frontage, which I talked about earlier, around $30,000. The public pathway connection between Jahn Place and to the multi-use pathway of approximately $25,000, and the road frontage along Beacon Avenue, which admittedly is a road frontage, but I think we've gone the extra mile with respect to, for example, the character of the bike, the bus lay-by and the bus station has been integrated into the design more than just kind of the standard stuff. We also did, and I know this was a comment that came out in terms of the proximity, in terms of what's the acoustics, and therefore we had an acoustical report prepared by specialists who have determined that if we, and have agreed to an acoustical design, making up those effectively, 1, 2, 3, those 4 key components. I won't tell you because I'm not the expert to go into what a OITC 35 is, but I'll let the acoustical engineers describe that. But anyway, going to this, then there is an agreement that it will meet the CMHC interior noise level requirements. So that's, once again, feedback that we'd received from previously. And then I'm not going to go through these in any great detail, but I do think my personal view in terms of the architectural design and the characteristics, that it is a very pleasing looking building. This is obviously at the corner of Beacon and the Pat Bay Highway, and you can see kind of towards the going bound that there is very good articulation in the building along the frontage of the Pat Bay Highway. And again, each one of these is just kind of an image along Beacon Avenue, and that's actually where the cursor is, actually the kind of the integrated bus stop that forms part of the architecture. And again, this is the interior, so this is sort of west facing, and you can see the 3 larger fir trees are actually the 3 of the existing fir trees that are actually on the site now, so the intention is to preserve them. It also does provide some shading for those using the courtyard area in the summertime, and also for the residents above, and includes, as you can see, the children's playground, recreation areas are on the first floor, and so on. And again, this is just a close-up along Beacon Avenue, but I think it does go to the attention to detail that's been paid on this project, and I think worthy of Council's consideration. And again, there has been an updated landscape plan, which, again, my apologies for this being so, which includes the pedestrian connection to the multi-use pathway, some changes in around here in terms of the playground, relocation of the recycle center and the hydro PMT to allow for future options when it comes to access, and a number of other critical features. I've only put this on but again, I think along with the architectural character of the building, I think an awful lot of attention has been paid to the landscape architecture, including the level of detail in terms of some of the things like fencing, gate entrances, recycle enclosures, and so on. I won't go into this. It's just an architect's thing, but we did do part of the reason for the siting of the building in terms of bringing it towards the east rather than the west is that we were very mindful as a principle not to have any overshadowing of the adjacent residents along Jahn Place. And so the bottom line is actually December 21st. So even when the sun is at its very lowest, that you can see that it's defined to stay away from overshadowing the neighbors. And of course, in December, it's dark by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so it's just you can't see that. What am I doing? So just in summary, and I don't know how I'm doing for my 10 minutes, sir, but we're almost there. Once again, it's affordable 140 units of rental housing to help address the provincial mandate in housing shortage. 56% of the units are 2-bedroom or larger, and those 2 and 3 bedrooms are large in terms of area as well as just the number of the unit mix. We have committed to 20% of the units at 20% below market. I will stop there and say this is not will not meet folks with deep need or rent geared to income. I actually have projects that I do for BC Housing and know what it takes to make those projects work and the amount of capital contribution that are grants. But this is just providing something to say that where we can make a dent into providing rents that, as I say, are up to 20% below market and have a meaningful impact towards providing more affordable rents for some. significant improvements to off-site improvements and beautification. Again, it offers a location we believe it offers a high degree of walkability, extensive landscaping, large recreation areas, children's playground areas, improve and widen pedestrian sidewalks. We do meet the bylaw in terms of parking and actually exceed the parking standards of the town, and that was confirmed also by Watt Consulting. And then the pedestrian connection. And then lastly, as it going back to first started in terms of policy, it does meet the fairly recently adopted OCP with respect to the land use and density and heights proposed. And I think with that, sir, I will end my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Strongatharm. I really appreciate we really appreciate your presentation. If you would like to take a seat now, I will invite folks to come up in public participation. And if a question is posed to you, you have the option of coming to the mic and answering that as you see fit. To begin, under this special public participation period, I'd ask Sandy Howrath, who is connecting via Zoom. If you can confirm your connection, we're just going to get you to see if we can connect your video and your audio.
Good morning, or good evening, actually. Yes, I am here.
Will you be connecting your audio or there you are. Now, I do want to speak just for a moment before you proceed, Ms. Howrath, that speakers do have 4 minutes. We won't have a clock, but I do ask speakers to keep their comments or questions to 4 minutes to be fair to everyone participating this evening. The floor is yours.
Great. First off, thank you everybody for your time tonight. I am a resident of Jahn Place. I live at 2162, so I am the property that is closest to this proposed development. And I'd like to speak to the application tonight for 2180 Beacon. One thing I would like to acknowledge, though I'm not in favor of a development of this scale, I do recognize and appreciate that there have been some changes to the application that certainly reflect positively for myself. So I do want to express thanks for the work of the town and the developer in making those. There are, however, 2 items of concern that I would like to bring forward. The first one is a recommendation from the town that the revised site plan be modified to allow for a driveway entrance onto Jahn Place. In the initial consultations, despite our residents raised several concerns about this. Despite those concerns being brought forward by the residents, the town has recommended that this entrance be placed onto Jahn Place. It is disappointing that our concerns weren't acknowledged for this. So I would like to ask the town council and the developer if at least during the construction phase that the construction vehicles not be allowed to access the site via Jahn Place. There are no sidewalks on the street. We have no choice but to walk directly on the road. Our residents are families with small children, seniors, and pet owners. In addition, we have a significant amount of pedestrian traffic using our street to access the town from the commercial area. Having the construction vehicles travel on our small congested street would pose a serious safety issue, not to mention the additional noise, emissions, debris, and congestion that the construction vehicles would bring. The second item I would like to bring up is actually a question, perhaps for the town, is considering the addition of the number of residents that this property will bring to the area, what is the plan for the pedestrian overpass? I'm sure all of you appreciate the current situation to cross the highway is not desirable. So just wondering if someone could address perhaps if there's plans for that in the future. And to close, the Jahn Place residents are the very people who live, work, and volunteer in the community of Sidney. We are the folks that voted this council in, and we are asking for your consideration in guiding this project so that it impacts minimally on the residents of Jahn Place. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Howrath, for taking the time to speak to council this evening. I've noted, and I'm sure my colleagues have as well, that you've raised points with regards to the rationale for the access egress being done at this time. the construction vehicle situation, and also the pedestrian overpass. So we won't be addressing, council won't be addressing those questions now. We'll be continuing public participation and then council questions of the proponent. But when it comes to later in the agenda item, you can be rest assured we'll raise those questions and we will address those.
Good. Thank you, Mary and council.
Thank you. I'll call for a second time. If there's anyone wishing to come forward to speak, please come forward. Good evening. If you could please provide your name and the municipality you reside in.
Mayor and Council, my name is Gerald Moffatt, and I live at 9512 Lochside Drive here in Sydney. This West Beacon development is a monstrosity, both physically and economically. First, the building. You've heard much of this before, but it's worth repeating. The building is enormous, utterly incongruous and inappropriate in size and scale anywhere in Sydney. Now, my comments are being quite sandwiched here, as I originally intended to do them in 2 minutes. But to give you an example, the frontage along Pat Bay is 400 feet. That would be the distance between 5th Street and 3rd Street on Beacon, and 5 stories high. A facade that is over half an acre in extent, except vertically. Such a development would never be approved east of the Pat Bay. Sydney residents would be out with torches and pitchforks. We all know that it would be impossible to get approved. The only thing that's letting it go is the historical anomaly of the West Side Local Area Plan, an error that has yet to be corrected. The gigantic size of this building causes serious problems, since it overwhelms its setting. These include harmful impacts on the intersection of Pat Bay and the Beacon itself, future development of it with off-ramps and so forth, pedestrian overpasses, and so on. It's one of the highest accident rates. I believe it is the highest accident intersection on the Pat Bay at the moment, something like 40 deaths a year. The impact will also be serious on Jahn Place, both during construction and in the possible, perhaps inevitable, conversion to it becoming the main entrance to this large development. The developer has made some changes. While welcome, these changes are minor. They're tinkering around the edges. They don't address the core issue, the grotesque oversize of this building. There have been repeated calls to spread the development over multiple smaller buildings. Importantly, the Advisory Planning Council's first recommendation when it looked at this project is that development should be subdivided into smaller buildings. The developer has ignored this core aspect. He'll give away small things, but not the elephant in the room, and it's one heck of an elephant. Turning now to the terrible economics. 20% on 20% of the units is a pittance, 4% of gross revenue. The project still would be earning 96% of full market rates. The developer's own numbers, right in the agenda package, show in 2025 he expects to charge rents nearly 30% higher than today. A 2-bedroom unit would jump from $2,700 to around $3,500 a month. A 30% jump, 30% in 2 years. Let that number sink in. Yes, the developer would jump rates 30%, but then graciously give back only 4% of that greatly increased revenue as the below market rates. He's willing to give 4% to get 30%. A great deal for the developer, a terrible one for the town and for renters. This will put rental prices out of reach, but all but the most wealthy. The median rental household income is of the order of $60,000 in Victoria. A 2-bedroom apartment, but these numbers would rent for $42,000 a year.
Mr. Moffatt, if I could ask, if you could just wrap up on your final point.
Absolutely. If council approves this project, this absorbent rental rate will effectively become the new 2025 market rate in Sydney. Council will not be solving the rental crisis and will instead be perpetuating it and aggravating it, locking in an enormous rent step-up that will persist as the new base rate, the new normal. Sydney needs rental housing, but Sydney doesn't need it so badly as to completely betray renters by approving a project with terrible economics. It would lock in a gigantic base hike to become the new base rate, not just for this project, but it would send the standard for all other adjacent rentals. It would be the market maker. Are we prepared to see rates jump 30% in 2 years?
Mr. Moffatt,
Thank you
for your comments there. Thank you, and we appreciate receiving your correspondence as well. I'll call if there's any speakers who wish to come forward. And for a final time, seeing none, I will call this, bring the special public participation period to a close. And Council, I will now turn to you if you have questions for it. Mr. Strongtimer, if you'd like to respond.
Through your worship to council, just a couple of things. I was trying to make a few notes of the comments. So with, I believe it was Sandy Howrath, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. So I certainly support her perspective with respect to the Jahn Place. It's never been our intention whatsoever to ever consider the primary access into and out of the property to be along Jahn Place. It's always been right in, right out along Beacon. That is something that's come through staff in terms of just looking at the and I don't want to speak for staff, but looking at the long-term future. If there was a overpass that was built, now I'm talking vehicular overpass, not pedestrian, then that's when there may be some consideration for that. And it was really just done, I believe, in terms of the request out of the abundance of caution in terms of just being prepared for possibly sometime in the future. But I would certainly wholeheartedly endorse that we have no intention of doing that, nor do we have any desire to do that in terms of access. Certainly I do understand construction and agreed that Jahn Place is a cul-de-sac. It's with modest detached homes on either side, no sidewalks. So once again, in terms of construction, agree that one of the things that town will require is a construction management, when we get to that point, plan, and that would include in terms of how is the handling of traffic on and off the site during construction. So I once again agree with that, and certainly acknowledge Ms. Horvath's comments with respect to making changes in response to some of the things we've heard. If I think she does mention about the pedestrian overpass, that is something I know that's been discussed for numbers of decades, and certainly it is something that longer term, as the entire West Side local area plan evolves and develops, will be an ongoing discussion. But at this stage, certainly it would be the way the building is designed. It would allow for that, and I'm not sure at this stage I can really comment anymore. With respect to a couple of comments that were made by Mr. Moffatt, I know he does refer to it as a monstrosity. That was his comment. The building is definitely divided into 3 individual parts. Yes, if you go from here to here, there are numbers of buildings that I could show that are actually longer than that, but it is divided into 3 parts and articulated specifically to ameliorate that point. And similarly, and that was one of the requests that came out, that was also identified in the APC, was that you would notice that the top 5th floor is set back. That was one of the things that was identified, and it was actually always a characteristic of the project. I'm sorry, I'm at a loss to specifically comment with respect to his economic analysis. I can only just say that the rates were done in terms of coming up with what it actually reflected was based on what we anticipated to be for this project current market rates in 2025, I think I said. Sorry about that. And then it's just simply a 2% increase, just as as a model. Where he gets the 4%, I don't know. All I can say is that the 20% reduction for 20% of the units for 20 years is a extremely meaningful a submission. I did a large project downtown for Starlight, which was 1,500 units, and they have 5% of those units, knowing how difficult it is to actually make up rental apartments work. They had a 5% that are below market in that particular project. So I really do feel that this is a meaningful contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Strongathorn, for speaking to the comments that you've heard.
Oh,
And so if you'd like to stay at the mic, I will
Sure.
now turn to
Okay.
colleagues for questions. I'll begin with Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation and for the opportunity to answer questions from the public and council. The Advisory Planning Commission made some very specific recommendations over 8 months ago, and I guess I'd like to get your specific comment on what was done to address those items in particular, if anything, and I'll have a further question, but specifically, the APC made reference to stepping back upper stories. Now, you just acknowledged the top floor, the 5th floor, having been stepped back. If you could comment then further on what consideration was given to doing that on other levels of the building. And then also the recommendation around breaking up the larger building
Yep.
into multiple smaller buildings. If you can speak to why that clearly hasn't been addressed. And there was a suggestion from APC around minimizing private balconies facing the highway, and perhaps that's part of the acoustic study that you showed us and the changes you made there. But if you can comment on those 3 items, please.
Yes, well, I think as far as the setbacks, as I say, the 5th floor is set back. I think the main one, I think, is breaking up the building into multiple buildings. We had discussions on that. The reality is to break it up into multiple buildings makes it, as far as having a rental project, makes it significantly more expensive. Having three separate foundations, it makes for a much higher construction cost. There's no question about it. We felt also that in terms of there was some suggestion of kind of turning the buildings 90 degrees. One of the, as I mentioned as part of my presentation, part of the reason for putting it the location where it is was that we were very, very mindful of the what some of the early community meetings we had with respect to folks along Jahn Place, and how do we best address that. So in terms of that APC, to break the building up into multiple buildings and even consider turning it 90 degrees was really something that didn't, it really would make the project as it currently formed uneconomic. We do feel, however, that in terms of the articulation that is shown in the building, that is now, and the changes that were made, it will not read like a long straight face whatsoever. The balconies, we did have a discussion about that. You could put Juliet balconies in, no question about that. Certainly it ties into our acoustical report. And the consideration there was, because there was a concern about how would you ever sit outside because of the noise of the highway. And that may be true, but not saying that it shouldn't be an option, and to be able to sit outside, that even Juliet balconies don't allow for any kind of flower pots and that sort of thing. And so, a conscious effort was made to say, okay, we need to meet an acoustical standard with respect to the building, and as you're living in the building, that to have the opportunity to have opportunities to go outside in something more than simply a Juliet balcony, I think it simply makes sense for the residents. They can choose to or not. And from an architectural point of view, the balconies also provide an architectural feature that actually does encourage that articulation and takes away from that sort of, quote, monotony. So it had a combination of reasons for keeping it the way it is, and I think that's about the best explanation I think I can provide. Am I missing one, Councillor?
No, thank you. I appreciate your comments on that. And if I may, I'll just acknowledge my appreciation for your statement with respect to Jahn Place and the intent that it is not going to be the regular entrance, access, and egress to this property. And you as a developer, I heard, would prefer that not to be the case. I know the community would prefer that not be the case, and I'll certainly pose some questions to staff when I have the opportunity later with respect to that, because I certainly don't support that either. I've got other questions, but I'll leave it there for the time and give my colleagues a chance to ask. Thank you, Mayor. Thank
you, Councillor Rintoul. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for your presentation. I'd like to follow up on Councillor Rintoul's question regarding the recommendation from APC on changing the layout of the buildings to break them up into smaller blocks. And your response to that was that it was not going to be affordable, and yet I heard from APC that from members of there that it could be done because you would be building these blocks on a similar singular unit that's below ground that would provide that multiple access to mechanical and that sort of thing, and that the buildings could be done. And I want to hear more on that because I'm really concerned about the livability of this location, both for the residents that are currently there and for the ones that will move in and be that more proximate to the highway. And I would like more information on why you don't think that's an affordable thing when others have said it is. Thank you.
One is it's simple in terms of the underground parking design. And when you get multiple buildings and you are having underground parking, let's say for let's say approximately the same number of units, I can assure you you'll have a lot more site coverage because of parking and whether it's individual parking and with the driveway access down. That alone, in my opinion, would make a significant change in terms of the from a sustainability point of view, because I do believe you'd be covering much more site coverage to do that. Building multiple buildings, definitely, because you've got a whole new set of framing for the underground for the walls, rather than it being a sort of one continuous building. Excavation. Certainly in our discussions, in terms of looking at costs without saying exactly how much, but it definitely would be a more costly approach to go to multiple buildings than one building. And as I say, the underground parking is just one component, but unfortunately underground parking is a very key cost of construction these days, with an underground parking stall costing anywhere, depending upon whether it's rock, which this isn't, or not, anywhere between $50,000 and $90,000 per stall. And so when you start having this add-on, it really does all of a sudden substantially increase the cost of construction. Again, you mentioned livability. The local area plan identifies this for up to a 6-story residential building. Yes, it could be repositioned. Agreed, it is adjacent to the Pat Bay Highway. There are many other examples where apartment buildings are located along the frontage of highways, whether they're here or Vancouver or elsewhere, and seem to fit in with the community well. So I guess my only comment would be that I think in terms of things that we've done, both in terms of landscaping as well as in terms of acoustics, that we've tried to address that as best we can.
Councillor Duck, you do have the floor.
Thank you. Just to further on that, have you actually gone to the drawing board and looked at the costing out of breaking down the massing of that building into the 4 or 5 separate towers perpendicular to the highway? Have you looked at that at all?
Yeah, only in a very in a discussion manner with the architect and what have you. We have not done detailed planning work on it. No.
Okay, so the costing you're saying is
Just based on
Supposition.
experience, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, based on experience, yes. Yeah, and conversations with the architect and what have you, yeah.
Okay, thank you. If I could, Mayor, I'd like to, I'm also concerned with the proximity to the highway, and that is part of that livability, and you comment on other locations outside of the Greater Victoria area that might be close to the highway. I think all of our neighbors here have taken great care in making sure that they're not too close to the highway, whether that's Langford or Central Saanich or Victoria. I think it's important that we take note of that. But to that point, you were talking about noise attenuation and the figures were given by engineering to do that. Will there be some explanation of those figures so that we can understand them as lay people ourselves? It would be nice to know what that noise attenuation actually equates to. Thank you.
Is that it? Should I? Yes, I'm not the acoustical engineer either. What it did, it looked at what the CMHC standards are and what would have to be done to meet those CMHC standards, and therefore the package in terms of whether it's the framing package or as extra insulation on the roof or what have you. It was all based to meet that standard. So which has been committed to. So, I mean, if there was more detail asked of that, it would be something I'd have to ask, the technical experts to explain. But they simply did say, this is the standard that you have to meet. If you apply this wall assembly or do this to the roof, or if you do this as far as the windows and the doors meet this standard, you will meet the CMHC criteria. So that's effectively what the report identifies.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Strogethorn, for your presentation and for your colleagues for being in attendance and to answer questions. Appreciate it. And thank you to community members who've spoken tonight. I have a few, and like Councillor Rentula, I'll probably save some for later because I have a few. So first off, straight, simple question. Is there any, at this time, intent to strata the building?
Yes, the intention would be to strata the building, but it would be covenanted. It wouldn't, and with a commitment under a housing agreement for a minimum of 30 years of rental. Doesn't mean that it wouldn't go beyond 30 years, so I don't want to say that it wouldn't, but the commitment would be absolutely for a minimum of 30 years that it would be rental.
Thank you. Next question, and it's fitting that the speakers who zoomed in at 2162 Jahn Place, where the path is going to extend from Jahn to the multi-use path on the highway. I noticed in the diagram that it speaks to a retaining wall. Can you speak to the height of that retaining wall?
You know the height of the retaining wall? Do you? Excuse me if I can.
Hi, Joe Newell, the architect. The wall is actually retaining the neighbor's property, so it would step down onto our site, and it varies from about 2 feet to 4 feet, 4 feet maximum.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it and looking how the property is now with the fence that this person has in the back and considerable vegetation. I'm just curious or concerned about potential privacy issues for people using the path and how garbage tends to get thrown, unfortunately, everywhere. So thank you for that answer. And the plan, obviously, based on what I'm seeing in pictures, is that for the vegetation that currently exists on the eastern lot line will all be gone.
Eastern.
Along the multi-use path. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, it would all be new planting material, with the exception, although it's not right along the eastern property line, but some of the larger fir trees we've identified, they were surveyed and identified for saving.
My last series of questions for this round involves Schedule A. And I think from my take, and maybe the communities as well, clearly, and you stated that earlier in your comments during your presentation, this isn't really an affordable housing building. And so I think part of the perplexing nature is that you mentioned when you're giving your numbers in this table about affordable units, I think if you just put below market there, it might have provided a little less confusion around that particular aspect. With regards to, I'm curious as to why in the one column you would provide information on household annual income for rent at 40% of income. And the reason I ask that is that from everything I've heard and read on experts, that trigger of 40% and up is where people get into danger zones. and why people are having trouble meeting their commitments on their housing costs. So I'm just curious as to why you provided that.
And it was based on 30%, just to be very clear.
Yeah, no, I just put that particular column.
The definition, whether it's CMHC or BC Housing, is 30% of income for shelter. Regrettably, there's lots of people who unfortunately are paying 50% and more on income, and so I think the 40% was just identified not as just simply what the rent represented if someone was paying 40%, but as to say the CMHC and BC Housing standards of rent is 30%.
Okay, thank you. And with regards to the actual units that would be below market, I'm looking at what you have in the mine is green here, but I'm wondering why you wouldn't try to incorporate as many of the smallest units, which would be the cheapest rent, in terms of applying that to the below, because then, I mean, it's only $80, but $80 for somebody can be a lot of money depending on how many their other bills are and what they need to live day to day.
Yeah, certainly open to that. The thought was that this was providing a range of units, 1, 2, and 3, and while it is not uncommon for many projects that even I've been involved with to have the below market rents on the smallest, usually studio units, which there are none in this project. It's true, but this was kind of a conscious effort, was consciously made to say that it would be across the all
Right.
types of units. And as you can see, it is meaningful, because if you look at what the market rent would be for a 3-bedroom, as you go down into the year, it's more than $1,000 a month less when you deduct the 20%. So there is a meaningful difference. It's just to say we are not providing, as I say, for folks for either deep need or rent guarantee income, which is a requirement where you need an awful lot of government grants to do that.
I guess my one observation would be that in a 3-bedroom unit, if you're, based on these rates, if you're able to get 2 roommates, it then becomes quite a bit more affordable. So my concern would be for 1-bedroom units, because that becomes then an obstacle for a lot of people in terms of, like, when I look at your numbers here, it's like based on a full-time person working 40 hours a week, which isn't even the norm anymore. It's like 35, 37 and a half hours a week. It's like $40 an hour. And understanding this is not affordable unit, that's still quite hefty. And so I think in terms of trying to make a greater impact in terms of helping people with the below market, it would be, for my liking, would be more towards the 1 and 2 bedrooms. Seeing that I understand why you're saying 3-bedroom, but I just think it allows, 3 bedrooms allows more flexibility for people if they have roommates.
Yeah.
And the last question I have on this particular aspect, and then I'll pass it back to the mayor until my next round, is so when this data that's in this Schedule A table, when do you know approximately when this was compiled?
This was compiled within the last few months. What we did, we would ultimately follow it with a market appraisal, but we've looked at rents and recognizing that these units are larger. If you look at some rents in Sydney right now, they're in fact, the market rents are at $5 a square foot, which is high, but that's market. And so you can see, if you, in terms of what we had identified as the market rent in the year, sorry, I'm just trying to find it here, 2020, 25, I think it was. So we've just sort of identified those as the kind of the market rents for at the time of completion of the project, and then discounted it to 20% based on what we anticipated to be a reasonable market rent, looking at what market rents are now, and then the 20% deduction.
And if I may, the reason I asked that question, trying to get an idea of timing, is with regards to the federal government's announcement of the removal of GST on all new rental buildings.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how that factors into rents in terms of passing it along and your costs. When I watched the announcement live, actually, and they interviewed a well-known developer in Ontario who has said that their buildings were going to go from condo to rental because of the change, and that depending on what materials you used, it could actually save $40,000 to $60,000 per unit in their construction costs. So I'm wondering, if these numbers were prior to that announcement, would this announcement and the ability to access this reduced funding, if you will, impact rents that you might charge on the building upon completion?
Well, I'll say that this analysis was done before the 5% GST announcement came out, so that's what you're seeing.
Yeah.
We have not done an analysis of what the impact of the 5%, the elimination of the GST would have, you know, and it will have it'll obviously have an impact on capital costs, and then sort of translating that out. You mean you have your operating costs, replacement reserve comes to net revenues, less mortgage equals, right? And so that would be something that we have not done, but certainly we could certainly look at it for sure, but we have not done it so far.
Thank you. Thank you for now, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to other first-time speakers, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for that presentation. So my first question is about parking. So will parking be provided for each unit as part of their rent, or will they have to pay extra for that?
I personally can't answer that, being not knowing 100% what the answer is, whether or not it would be, whether parking would be included rent or whether rent would be over and above that. I could certainly get back to you and let you know. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, no, yeah, I would like to know that.
Mm-hmm.
And also, how that might impact the affordability of the below market.
Yeah.
Because
And that's perhaps
of course,
something, again, not knowing the answer to it, but I understand where you're going in that, and perhaps there's a tie-in with the affordable housing
Right.
units, yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Next, in regards to accessibility, so I know that changes have been made or will be made shortly to the building code in regards to additional accessibility features in multifamily buildings in BC.
Mm-hmm.
So have you incorporated those into your most recent design? And I just want, and also, what measures are being taken to ensure all common areas like the playground, the gardens, pathways will be accessible?
You could answer the first and I can answer the second.
What was I didn't hear.
Well, just in terms of the units and meeting accessibility standards under the code.
Yeah. How many? Sorry.
Well, no, I think it is just you want to know whether from a design point of view in terms of meeting accessibility standards.
Yes.
Is that a fair?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on the BC building code.
Right. Yeah.
But all that I know is that they have made or they will be making changes to the building code for multifamily buildings, and how have those things been incorporated?
Yeah, well, we have incorporated accessibility requirements into the suites that we want to be accessible. I think it was 5%. Is that the number? Yeah. So 5% of the suites, again, across the range. So like 1s, 2s, and 3-bedroom suites will have, for example, wider doorways, more space beside the doorways for access for people with wheelchairs. The washrooms will be designed to be accessible. The kitchens will be designed to be accessible. And then if there's any requirements for adaptable, we can also incorporate those spatial requirements into the adaptable suites, but we don't typically do the washrooms and the kitchens as fully accessible, but they are, they can easily be revised. They can easily be reconfigured so that they are accessible. So the counters will be dropped, and bigger toe spaces under the cupboards and that kind of thing. And then cabinets can be removed so that there's an e-space under them for workstations, or for a work surface for someone in a wheelchair, that kind of thing.
So just to clarify, so there's a requirement usually for 20% to be adaptable, but you're saying you're doing, so are you doing 20% adaptable and then 5% accessible?
Yeah.
And is the 5% included in that?
No,
adaptable?
5% plus 20%.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so that 5% is fully accessible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, and the adaptable ones, so you mentioned that they could be made accessible.
That's the idea. Yeah. So it's just so people can age in place. I mean, people's abilities
Right.
change, so they don't want to have
So
to
the
move.
challenge with rental units, of course, is that people can't normally, you know, if they have an adaptable unit and they need to make adjustments to make it accessible, what provision would be in place for them to make such significant changes to a rental unit that they don't own?
I'm not sure how that works.
Well, I guess the first point is that, of course, it will be made, for example, if the counter's up here and it needs to be lower, it will be made so it will be easily made accessible. In terms of if new resident comes in and has mobility issues, that would be a discussion at that time with the property manager, just in terms of what the needs would be and what the arrangements would how the arrangement would take place. I can't say right now exactly, you know, because each individual who has some mobility or accessibility issues, each one of them may be slightly different. So what their needs are may be slightly different. So I think you'd actually have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. If I may, just carrying on for one last thing, just going to your second question. Yes, so the new pathway that's proposed to get to the multi-use pathway, the replacement of the existing pathway from Jahn Place to Beacon Avenue, the interior pathways leading from the activity room and the outside patio area and the playground, they're all made to be accessible with folks with mobility issues, so they would be all hard surfaced.
Right, okay, thanks for that. So, and is there any sort of calculation in terms of the units the 20% that would be below market? Is there any idea of how many of those would be the accessible units, knowing that it's often persons with disabilities that need those accessible suites are usually more represented in the lower income levels? So I'm just wondering how.
To be very candid, we hadn't got to that level of detail. We have committed that they would be through the range of units, and we've also committed to this number of units. I mean, I think we would have just kind of gone on the same principle that we've got 20% of the units, and therefore we would apply the 20% to I mean, that just off the top I'm saying that, but that would seem to make sense in terms of our approach.
Okay. Maybe one suggestion might be is that if the CRD is going to be administering this, I'm sure they have wait lists of people who need accessible units. So, you know, if you find that there's a high demand for those, then maybe that might help guide how many of those units might be made affordable or below market.
Yeah, fair enough. It's always a bit of an issue. I mean, I've got one project that just completed. It's a BC housing project. It's 58 units, and we do have accessibility units and some that were permanently, but there hasn't been the take-up rate now. It could change. So this is and particularly with the rental unit, it's always kind of an ongoing issue about trying to manage that in a way that you're meeting the needs and the requirements, at the same time being flexible enough to accommodate everyone who might choose to have their home at this building.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question is about noise and ventilation. So in the acoustical design report, it mentions that opening the windows for ventilation would result in an unacceptable noise level, and therefore they said that alternative ventilation is necessary throughout the residence. So have plans been changed to provide that alternative?
Yeah, we've looked.
Ventilation?
Yes, we have. In fact, I even have a slide up which I didn't show. But yes, we've looked at a number of strategies, which I won't go into right now. But that is something that we definitely have looked at, both in terms of the air into the hallways, the air, the low-E windows. We've included preparing windows that will allow for air conditioning. And so there's a whole strategy that perhaps, you know, at
Okay.
another time
Yep, sure.
I could go through.
Okay, good. And then just going back to, again, I know it was sort of covered earlier in the below market versus affordable. So I mean, one of the attractions for me, and I guess for many people, is that, you know, the lure of, or the need for affordable rental units, which to me is different than 20% below market.
Yes.
And so I guess what comes to my mind is that it kind of sounds good. However, knowing that, you know, your company controls 140 of those units and will set the price for the market units at whatever they deem
Whatever
that
the
they
market
can,
is,
they
yeah.
can they can get for. And they're new units, so I presume that they would command a fairly good price. And as mentioned earlier, people are desperate for housing, and you might find 2 or 3 people getting together to move into one of those. So so I think that development is going to have a significant impact on determining what the general market rate is for the town, I guess. And so I'm wondering, when, you know, this was discussed about the 20% below market, did we, remind me if we've discussed it already, but I would be more comfortable with using sort of more definitive terminology, such as that is used by CMHC to define affordable, what is affordable rent for a certain, for the part of the housing needs sort of spectrum that we're looking at. And is that something that was considered? And I'm just wondering how we settled on 20% below market rather than a CMHC.
So 20% with CMHC, so 20% would be the 80th percentile of the market, which is actually comes actually out of CMHC. And again, I think, as I mentioned, I mean, we're not trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes in terms of this is not, as I say, RGI rents. But it was kind of looking at, and through conversations with CRD housing folks in terms of their, you know, looking at this and also monitoring it. So we do know that once it's in place, it will be monitored through CRD housing, so there's a reliance that ratio will always be maintained, and there is a third party observer, if I can call it that. I mean, so as mentioned, compared to what we identify when legitimately trying to determine what is the market for this project in 2024, it was actually, and then discounting that by 20%, it comes to a number. And then we've looked at what the median income is in Sydney, both if you go back to the 2020 census, or 21 census data, which is 2020 income information, and and there are basically three different categories. There's family, there's a single family, and there's what's referred to as economic family. And then you look at the median income and looking at the rents that is being proposed for discount, and we definitely fall, you know, within or below that median income for Sydney going back to the 2021 census information. And that was part of the criteria in terms of looking at the ability to reduce the rents by 20% and how that then would fit within the median income based on the 2020 census data. And there's some other data that was done recently with respect to moderate income limits and what BC Housing say for 2023. They use a figure of actually of $82,310 as the sort of median income. So we're definitely between CMHC, census data, and BC Housing, kind of definitely in the, in the range of all three kind of criteria with respect to the standards.
Okay, thanks for that. And just in regards to, so your conversations with CRD.
Mhm.
Councillor Keefe, I'm just going to ask if you perhaps go a little closer to the mic. I'm not sure
Oh,
the mic's
sorry.
picking your voice up.
Really? Okay. All right. So when you were chatting with CRD, were they aware that these units were going to be stratified? And I guess the reason for my questions are around, I understand that there would be covenants, that there's housing agreements, but it seems to me it would be a lot more cumbersome administratively if you have a number of units that are owned by separate individuals and having to, and I don't know, I'm making that assumption, but is that the case? And would administration be more costly and cumbersome having for the CRD to have separate housing agreements with dozens of different people?
I mean, I've got a couple of projects where the units have been stratified, but there are income limits or there's rent limits. One in Saanich, and I have a housing agreement with on that. It hasn't proven to be a problem. The intention is for the units to be stratified. They won't necessarily be sold right away.
Okay. And I don't know if this is a question for you or staff, but who pays for the cost of the administration? So CRD is going to do it.
It would be the developer.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So that would be an ongoing operating cost of the of administering or managing the building.
Right. Okay. Okay, that's good. That's enough for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to, before going to second-time speakers, either Councillor Novek or Councillor Duncan, if you have any questions at this juncture. Okay, I'll speak for a first time before going to second-time speakers. Thank you for the presentation. In no particular order, just some of the points that have been raised with regards to the economic viability if the building was to be broken up into separate buildings. You've spoken to construction costs, but if there were separate buildings and there were view corridors or corridors between the buildings, there would be fewer units on the property, and then the amenities on the common space outdoors would be less. Can you speak to that being contributing to the
because we
economic
haven't done a deep dive into it, I don't want to presume something in terms of, say, achieving the same number of units and the building going, say, on an east-west, I got that right, east-west direction, just how far they would have to come towards the west side, I should say. And in terms of other impacts on, say, for example, residents of Jahn Place, the discussion took place just around the complications of having multiple buildings as opposed to one building. As simple as, for example, you have one elevator core with a couple of elevators for one building. You now have elevator cores for every building, just as one example from a cost point of view and from an operational point of view. So there definitely are implications for that. I guess in terms of the design and the potential implications, yes, it is one building. It is deliberately put closer to the east side or west.
I might try to simplify my question. If you had 5 separate buildings, there are going to be space between the buildings, and so in having space between the buildings, you would in the end have fewer units on the property, would you not?
Not necessarily, but again, it would depend upon if you had basically a rectangular building and five rectangular buildings. Let's just say we're saying 5. I'm not so sure it would be that. I think the one thing, though, that if you do have multiple buildings, I'm sorry to interrupt, would be, though, that you know, part of the planning, if you look at the landscape plan, for example, and the kind of the public space for the home residents, and the space that all faces south, and it's a large area integrated with pathways, I just don't see how you could possibly achieve the similar kind of ambience and character outside space that you would if you had multiple buildings.
Thank you. With regards to determination of market rents, you've spoken to it a couple of times, and I think once you made reference to CMHC establishes or does research, has data with regards to what the market rents for various unit sizes are. What data will you be using as market rents for the various size units before you apply the discounts or the rent reductions?
Typically, you would do a rental appraisal, because CMHC does annual rental analysis for purpose-built rental buildings, and they do, but it's typically, or what it is, it doesn't necessarily give you what the market rent is for a building in 2024. They will say, for example, all buildings built after 2005 to 2022, which is the last data collection, October. They will say the average rent for any buildings built after 2005 to 2022 for a one-bedroom is X, two-bedroom is X or Y. And so they provide that information. They provide all sorts of other information. But I believe, and once again, this will be a discussion with staff, but if there was a determination, certainly in the city of Victoria, I provided to the city a market appraisal. And that market appraisal became the benchmark done by an independent appraiser, and that became the benchmark for determining rent, market rent that is, and then from there, then the discount for, in this case, 20% was taken from that market rent as established by a independent qualified third party.
Okay, thank you. My next question is with regards to the terms below market rental and affordable rental. And I think as my colleagues have used it, and I think our appreciation of it, and you've defined it in some of your comments, or I'm taking it from your comments, but want to confirm that below market rent is you establish what market rents are, and you're going to 20% below that, so that's below market. We understand that the definition for affordable rents is that it is rent geared to income, and that the rent income threshold is 30%. We also understand, and you touched on it in one of your comments this evening, a part of your presentation, that in projects that have affordable units, that is, units where rent is geared to income, and the CRD Housing Corporation manages some 1,900 units, and many of those units housing some 4,000 residents in the CRD, and many of those units are rent geared to income, is that it takes substantial equity from external sources to make those developments affordable. And for example, CRD Housing Corporation created the Regional Housing First program, which brought $130 million of equity to create 4,000 affordable units. So my question to you is having made that distinction, and I see you nodding, is did you have discussions with the CRD or other, BC Housing is one, CMHC is another, on the opportunities for equity to come from those external other levels of government or agencies to create rent geared to income units in this project?
I mean, we've certainly, in our discussions with the CRD housing folks, I mean, we had a sort of a couple of rambling discussions, but to your point in terms of the affordable, or we keep meeting deep need and RGI, rent geared to income, you really are reliant on government programs, which actually one comes up come November the 17th actually, and that's where the program requires that 30% of the units meet deep need, which means that the rents are no more than $500 a month. For a one-bedroom, 50% of the units must be RGI, which means that for a one-bedroom, rents are at $830 a month. And the so-called affordable units are based for a one-bedroom are about $1,600 a month. But to do that, for new construction, because I'm just putting in an application for a society, there will be, this is for 77 units, and it's going to cost about $35 million, of which at least half of that, now that includes soft costs, the construction cost will be about $28 million. At least half of that has to be government grant, and there will be a monthly per unit rental subsidy of somewhere in the order of $700 a month. Then that's just the reality of today's construction costs of, you know, and so clearly you'd have to be in that sort of category to truly meet deep rents for deep need and RGI folks. That's just a reality.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. I have three other questions. The first is with regards to construction, and I appreciate that upon if this project were to receive final approvals, that prior to issuance of the building permit, staff would have a construction would work with you to develop a construction management plan. But having heard the input from a Jahn Place resident this evening with regards to construction vehicles, are you confident at this time that you can actually construct this project without construction vehicles using Jahn Place?
Yes, and again, without sounding a bit facetious, but because the building, it is a 2-acre site, the major excavation is towards the east half of the building. There's so where some of the surface parking in and the large area of outside community space. So there's a lot of compared to a project I've just got going about construction, which has zero opportunities. There's many opportunities for stockpiling of materials, trucks coming in, and so on. So yeah, I can guarantee that it can take place on site, but there would be a traffic management plan that would be provided to the town.
Thank you. My next question is, and I won't ask for the slide to come up because I think we can all visualize it, is there is the drive aisle access to the surface parking, and there is the connection to Jahn Place. And in a previous presentation with that drawing up on the board, you made reference, and so I'm now going back to the last time you were before council, that residents of Jahn Place as pedestrians or cyclists would have ease of access from Jahn Place to that corridor. I think you indicated in the drawing tonight that there will be a sidewalk there, but residents, again, whether pedestrians or cyclists, would be able to safely use that access to Beacon Avenue West.
Yeah, and because now with the access also through a a registered easement to be able to also get to the multi-use pathway on the highway, you now have, if anyone, and not just residents of Jahn Place, but of course folks coming from the west of that, coming down, and they would be able to obviously get access, guaranteed access to points beyond.
No, and I certainly appreciate the addition of that right of way for access to the highway path for individuals who wish to go north. My last question is around workforce housing, and so it's a priority within our official community plan. It's a priority within our housing priorities, and we know that for the 20% of the units, the 28 units that will be 20% below market value, that CRD will be involved in monitoring the rentals in this building and the compliance, and that they will verify their income to be eligible for those units, and there will likely in the housing agreement be a threshold of income for those applicants. My question is around consideration of whether income would be for people who are employed only, or people who have all income sources. So people may have investment, their income may be from investment, they may be on a pension, and those sort of things. I think we might consider true workforce housing to be that which was the below market rentals would be, the eligibility would be for people who had employment incomes. Can you answer that at this time? I realize those discussions, will ensue further at such time that a housing agreement is being struck, but I want to open it for comment.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get the question. I mean, one of the things that even identified in the presentation, the fact that there is this large, now 3,500 plus folks who work almost next door. And so that was, so in terms of workforce housing and providing places to live, work, and sort of play pretty darn close together, that certainly, in terms of applying some criteria, trying to encourage those units for workforce housing, which I think is kind of where you're heading.
People with employment income.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, we're more than happy to have a conversation with staff about that. It's kind of, then you've got to pry into, well, is this strictly your income and this income just for that? And yeah, but I don't have, there are some, I could sort of, there are some complications, but I totally get understand why you're asking.
It's to be considered. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for taking my questions as well as colleagues. I will turn to second-time speakers. I had Councillor Duck first, then Councillor O'Toole, then Councillor Garnett. Thank
you, Mayor. And these are three follow-up questions to my colleagues. You mentioned in putting into breaking down the block and putting into separate blocks, you'd have elevator cores. Are you saying there's only going to be one elevator core in this large building?
There is a central elevator core with a stack of elevators basically in the center, because the main activity room and recreation rooms are on the first floor, right adjacent to the main lobby area, and outside that is a patio area. And you go in there, and there's, as I say, the bank of elevators that go up, and you would either go up and turn right or go up and turn left.
Thank you. You mentioned that the complex would be stratified, and you indicated in your response that it would not be necessarily sold to individual owners. Can you give more clarification to that?
That is strictly with the conversations with the owner. I think I would be remiss to kind of make a comment just on that without getting clarification. I'm not trying to not answer your question, but the intention is, as I say, if you're renting these buildings for units, I should say, for minimum of 30 years, that's a long time. And I know that the owner has talked about that he'd like to have it stratified for future considerations, not meaning necessarily an immediate considerations for selling them initially. I mean, the owner has hotels and rental buildings across Canada. So it's one of those things that it wasn't thought to be any way blocking the promise for rental, and or just exactly when a unit may be sold. It may be something that would actually be downstream 30 years from now. But again, I'd have to just get further clarification to answer it directly from the owner.
Okay, that would be appreciated.
Who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight.
My last question is the rent value. In referring to the table
Yes.
in there, you have a two-bedroom, two-bath would be $3,400 per month in 2025 dollars. Certainly, our region has already received significant rent increases, and even now the two-bedroom, two-bath rent rate in Greater Victoria is $2,800. So the ranges of yours goes from 20 to 35% above that in 2 years, and we've already experienced those significant numbers in this time. What led you to believe that you're going to see a 20 to 30% increase over and above what it is now? Like I'm concerned about that because of.
Yeah, but we're not because, as I say, when you look at the rents that we used as a base, and again to be verified by appraiser, in my
Sorry,
view.
Mr. Strongathorn, I'm just gonna ask just a little closer
I'm
to the mic.
sorry.
We are
Yes, my
recording the meeting as well.
My
so
apologies, yes,
I appreciate it.
so I'm not sure, we looked at sort of the base rent starting in first year and then applying a 2% interest, or 2% rent increase. So I'm not sure if I completely understand.
Well, let me be clear. Your rent for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath in 2025 is $3,400. The
Yes, sorry, yes.
Yeah, right now, if you go online, which I just did while you were conversing, the average for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath in Victoria is $2,800. That is a $600 increase over $2,800. And that's at the lowest rent you're charging. That's a 20% increase.
Okay.
In
The difference, if I may add, is we've applied what the standard rent is per square foot, which is kind of standard, and so these units are substantially larger than most other units you'll find anywhere in Greater Victoria, certainly new ones. And so as a consequence, because they are so much bigger, that the rents then would reflect the fact that they are larger, that provides for more room in the unit. So they're substantially larger than many of the units that I currently am involved with. Thinking that in the Sidney market, and also looking at, the potential for families that having larger units was beneficial. But that's where the rents were or the rents that you see are square footage times the rent per square foot.
Thank you. I would suggest you need to relook at that, because as was identified, CMHC real median income in Sydney is under $50,000. So, and yes,
no. Anyway, okay.
You can look it up. No. Under $50,000 for real median income. And so with 2 people working, that's just over $100,000. So your affordability, even for market rate, and to the mayor's earlier question, is that you're not allowing people who are workforce here to afford to live in those units, no matter what size they are. And so I think you need to go back and look at that, because I can't anticipate that rents will go up 20 to 30%.
Councillor Deck, I will interject. We're not giving direction. We will do that through motions.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I will turn, actually, I do have Councillor Rintoul and Councillor Garnett, but I'm going to turn to Councillor Duncan for a first time.
Thank you. So I've been listening to my colleagues ask question about affordability, and not sure why we ask questions anymore. It's the construction cost, and it is what it is. But Councillor Duck's question about the 2-bedroom and 2-bathroom, and you're saying these are larger units. I'm kind of wondering why there's a second bathroom. Bathrooms are very expensive, and that adds considerably the extra plumbing and fixtures to construction costs. And I'm wondering why they're there. I mean, I've been looking in the rental market for 3 bedrooms for a family of 4. We've never looked at a place that had a second bathroom for 3 bedrooms. Of course, we're looking at suites and things like that, but it seems like that would be a simple way to decrease the cost, would be to remove second bathrooms. And and I'm looking at spending 70% of my income on a rent. I've never, in my 41 years, spent less than 45% of my income on rent. So I understand, and I find the insistence on the 30%, trying to go for 30% affordability, odd. I know CMHC set that, but it hasn't happened in my lifetime, right? So I'm looking at the practical ways to actually change the construction cost, and it seems the square footage in the bathroom is an easy one. In the past, I've been told by condo developers that they couldn't remove that because they couldn't sell the places. Everybody demands, extra amenities now. But I feel in a renter market, we're desperate enough that could be removed and these things would still fly. Can you talk to whether that's something that can be looked at this stage?
Well, I guess the design, and I don't want to sound like an architect, which I'm not, but the design, there was preliminary discussions about what was appropriate here, and kind of a deliberate decision was made not to go high end. It wasn't necessarily mean it all high end. It was said that, looking at but at this location and in Sydney, a wonderful community, that in fact we should go for larger units, and then, as I say, the second bedroom really, second bathroom, I should say, was kind of a consideration that was sort of part of the decision going into kind of the functional planning that went into the building design. I guess you say to start talking about, say, removing second bathrooms and reorganizing the units would be a pretty major undertaking, because I'm not the structural engineer, but which walls are structural when you've got walls that have been designed? So it would be a fairly substantial undertaking to start doing that. I guess I can just go back and say the reason why, I guess rightly or wrongly, was just in terms of looking at the initially functional planning, what were the amenities that we're trying to achieve both inside the unit as well as other amenities that would be available to residents. We had 2 bathrooms.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan? Thank you, Councillor Duncan, for your question. I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you, Mayor. It's following up on a question that Councillor Keith asked, because the response wasn't clear to me with respect to heating and cooling. And so, look, we know the east side of this building is going to be very noisy. It's adjacent to a highway with traffic lights there, so there's going to be a lot of noise. The west side of the building is going to be quite hot for 5 months of the year, because that's, the exposure to the sun is going to be great, particularly on those higher floors. Those are going to be very hot units. It wasn't clear to me in your response to Councillor O'Keefe if you have changed the intent, as was described at APC. I believe it was just electric baseboards and a window, not a window treatment, but a window that would help with lessening the effect of the sun in the units to repel some of that heat. Are you saying now that the building will be forced air HVAC? Was that your response, Councillor Keefe?
So we're looking at a couple of things. The building been designed to a minimum of step code 3 with exterior continuous. This is again, I'm now relating specifically to heat mitigation, heat buildup. We mentioned about the low E coating applied to the second glazing, which is what to do. From a passive point of view, you'll notice not those existing, but again, thinking the biggest heat buildup will be on the west-facing units as the sun comes around from, and so the balconies shade approximately 50. So the balconies themselves provide a certain degree of shading to the to the unit below. Corridors make up air supplies. It will be air conditioned before and being supplied to the corridors depending upon the outside air temperature. We are actually going to, it's sort of a lead related thing, which is the color of the roofing, which also then and so we're looking at both the 4th and 5th floors will have light colored roofing as opposed to the standard roofing. We are putting enhanced insulation on to minimize the heat gain on the 4th and the 5th floor. We're looking at, from the west side in particular, south side, which is the Beacon Avenue, to have what's not on there now are what's referred to as eyebrows, which are, again, they come out from the windows. They are angled in terms of the actual, so when the sun hits it, it actually deflects the sun, so you don't get that same radiation. And lastly, we have been looking at the ducting and air. One of the other things I guess I should say, I'm sorry, is that we are putting in the window inserts, and this can be done by covenant, to allow for, when we're looking at, I won't say portable, but movable cooling systems. We've done this in a couple of other, in fact, I've got one right now where I'm doing that, so they can actually be removed in the wintertime, so they're not getting in the way. So that would be a commitment. The last thing that we are looking at, but I can't say absolutely that we've done this yet, is looking at ducting air, supplying air exhaust from each suite and gang to the top unit where there would be cooling and heat recovery system, which would be like an HVAC system. Whether that would be for all of the units or not, I'm not sure. We've had a discussion about whether or not it really needs to be on the west side and the south side units. The east side units just don't get the degree of sun. So I can commit to all those, except that to say the architect was just looking at the heat pump system for the west side units. So I don't know if I've specifically
Yep, so
answered
what
your
my
question.
takeaway is it's under consideration right now, and that currently it
So
wasn't
the
planned
difference
to be.
would be whether or not they would be fixed units with ducts that go to the roof in terms of air conditioning, or whether they would be movable air conditioning units that have already a built-in window insert that will allow for a cooling system. But either way, one of those two will be
Thank you.
installed.
Thank you. And then lastly, for myself, I guess it's a comment at this stage. You made it clear that it's unlikely to be economically viable to do multiple smaller buildings on the site. It's a large piece of property. I would have thought with the 8 months since APC deliberated on this, that maybe some of the effort, to look more specifically at maybe perhaps 3 smaller buildings with one common underground parkade linking to each of those 3 smaller blocks would have made better use of the site with less mass in its general appearance. And taking into consideration some of Councillor Duncan's comments that perhaps there would have been some efficiencies in revisiting the size of the units. If we're truly looking to address rental accommodation need at a lower cost for our community, some of those steps probably would have helped this project, would be my comment. I'll leave my time there. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Before going to Councillor Garnett, I'll turn to Councillor Novek for a first time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's taken me a while to formulate questions that have not already been formulated by my colleagues. It's been great listening to them, but Councillor Duncan said something that really struck home, and then Councillor Rintoul talking about the air conditioning made me think that wouldn't, I mean, first of all, quick comment.
Sir, I've interjected with a number of councillors. We don't have any motions on the floor. We have a staff report to receive, and we'll have recommendations to consider. Comments, if they're leading quickly to a question, this is a question time for the proponent.
Very quickly. My only comment was, this is an expensive building. And my question, quite simply, is, if this were a purpose-built rental, as opposed to a strata building, would you not be able to offer far more, and I emphasize the word far more reasonable rents? Building it as a strata, for which the intention is to sell, necessarily increases building costs. And if the point of this is to create workforce housing, which you so eloquently described, being close to areas of industry in our town, if indeed this is to be workforce housing, why would you not build a purpose-built rental that could offer rentals in price ranges that are affordable to these people that are working there? Because these aren't.
I would call it a rental building because the minimum is 30 years. So 30 years is a long time. So I would say that this was consciously is a rental building.
Purpose-built was my point, not strata.
Yes, and again, I'm sort of repeating myself. Yes, could the units have been a third smaller and more one-bedrooms? Yes, I mean, I think that's fair. One of the things I know, even in the OCP, was the encouragement of larger 2- and 3-bedroom units. I mean, that's one of the objectives in terms of providing for larger units that would allow for families to live there. The economic reality is, to your point, is that, as I say, construction costs are very high, irrespective of whether it was this building or another building. In as much as I agree that two bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, that is more expensive than 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. But I wouldn't call this building, by any stretch luxury. I think it was, trying to hit a market suitable for Sidney. We agree we're not. This is not a nonprofit society. We aren't, making an application for community housing fund money, and therefore we recognize that we're trying to do something rather than simply market rents. We're trying to do something that would actually bring down the rents to below market, and we thought that we were providing something meaningful because there is a substantial decrease in the actual between the 20% and what market rent would be. So yes, we could make the units smaller. We just didn't. We thought that this would be appropriate for the market in Sidney. I wouldn't say it's, as I say, a high-end building. Some of the exterior, I mean, yes, it has some rock finish, but a lot of it's some cementitious material. So I think there's a conscious attempt to make an attractive building, in my opinion, while not being over the top. Some special attention has been paid for sure to landscaping because we thought that was important. But again, I wouldn't suggest that I wouldn't suggest that it's the building is an excessively luxurious building. It was not, certainly wasn't intended to be, nor when you actually look at the materials it's relatively standard construction.
Councillor.
Thank you for that, Mr. Strongathorn, but that doesn't really answer my question. My point was not to the size of the units or the building finishes or the materials. I know that you've done it on as tight a budget as you can, but my question really is, if this were built as a purpose-built rental, you'd have common hot water heating, you'd have common heating and cooling, which on a per unit basis would be a lot less expensive than putting individual air handling units or individual water heating units into each unit, thereby saving lots of construction money and saving money on the operating costs over a period of 30 or 40 years. And there are other economies to be had if you're not going to be stratifying the unit. So that's my point. If indeed this is designed and built as a rental property to support the workforce in Sidney, why was it not designed and built that way without the ultimate sale as strata units in mind?
The only comment I'd make is that there aren't a centralized cooling system or a centralized water system. There will be those centralized systems. The air conditioning even for rental buildings, there's a lot of them, there's the portable, or not portable, but they're PMVs that actually are in individual units, and that's become actually commonplace even for, let's say, a project doing that with BC Housing. So, you know, I think I would argue a little bit that that the way it's been designed is more expensive because of the systems. I definitely don't think that that would be the case in terms of what's being proposed.
Thank you, Councillor Novek. I'll turn finally to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your answers. My last couple of questions center around the acoustical design report, just to take a right turn.
Sure.
So it mentions the, and I'm going to say this for the audience, the noise exposure forecast, so NEF. Anything above 35 you shouldn't build, basically, when it, in relation to aircraft noise levels. So in the package, it talks about the most recent 2019 NEF contours map. I guess my first question is, and I don't know if I'm the only one that got this, but my map is from 2013, not 2019. So it was really hard for me to understand that what was reached in conclusions based on the, if this is, the numbers talked about here don't reflect what I'm looking at on a map. And as a person who lived 2 streets away from the airport on the other side, I can tell you that there was a lot different noise exposure from 2013 to 2019. You just have to look at passenger numbers, more commercial flights, all of that factored in. So do the numbers in here actually reflect, like I'm trying to make a correlation here?
Without going back, all I know is that they actually went to the site, they did on-site monitoring. I know for the acoustical engineers, a few months ago. I would have to go back and just check on the terms of the 2019. I would have to think they'd be using the most current numbers. Just as a sidebar, of course, one of the things that are in the planner's report that should the application proceed, that there would have to be irrespective of the noise, the attenuation measures that would be that are being proposed, that there would be a noise covenant that would be placed on the property, which is a requirement of, of DR Code Authority.
Yeah. And staff actually does mention that in one of the recommendations. Yeah. So my last center of questions, or questions center around the noise monitoring station that was placed in to come up with the average sound level of being 65 decibels during the survey, the three nights that they, or during April when they took the measurements. So with regards to the actual station, approximately how tall would that measurement device be?
I can't answer that. I don't know exactly what it was. I wasn't on site during it. I could certainly get the I can certainly ask the acoustical engineers that question.
Appreciate that. And so when I was looking at the map, do you, I mean, you may not be able to answer this as well, but I was trying to gauge exactly how far into the property they placed it, because it's really hard to tell looking from the map with the red dot. And I actually went out and tried to gauge myself based on this map and stood on the multi-use path approximately where they would have put it, but I'm trying to gauge where exactly that device was gathering its data.
I believe it was closer to the highway, so they came in off of Beacon Avenue. But once again, I'm a little bit on dangerous grounds. I could certainly get that answered for you, but I don't know exactly where it was and nor how high the monitoring station was.
Okay.
But I can certainly easily find that out through the consultants.
Thank you for that. I just a comment, if the device was placed, and I'm assuming it would have been on the property, there is a rather significant layer of vegetation that exists up that entire, as I mentioned before, and you said it would be gone. And I think that the data that is provided would not actually reflect accurate numbers of decibels with that, because that vegetation would buffer a lot of sound.
Yeah, and to that point, as I say, the plans have been changed so actually a lot of that buffering, we've actually changed the plan, the most recent plan that was part of my presentation, so that landscape buffer that you see now would, quite a bit of that would be retained.
Further up, but it's just more towards where the
towards
measurement device was in the
Beacon.
Beacon
So
Pappy Highway.
going towards Beacon, yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
at
And
intersection.
there's not as much vegetation there to begin with, actually.
And appreciating the fact that the fourth and fifth floor, the sound would dissipate a bit higher, but I'm just thinking of the ground level and second and third floor. And to add on to Councillor Rintoul's point about noise pollution, there's also the factor of air pollution. You have hundreds of vehicles a day that sit at that intersection. I can't remember the exact numbers for the study that was done on the traffic study, but it'll be 2.5 to 3 minutes they'd be idling. Multiple vehicles, hundreds and multiple times a day. So that is also another factor that will impact the livability of those eastern facing units. So yeah, those are just comments and concerns as I went out and stood there and just on a Sunday listened to noise traffic, and it wasn't even when the ferry docked. And I do think that the numbers would be significantly higher than what was presented here based on the thickness of that vegetation and how I think it would buffer the sound. So thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Are there any further questions for Mr. Strongatharm this evening? Seeing none, Mr. Strongatharm, I want to thank you very much for not only your presentation, but taking the questions from members of the public, but also from members of council this evening. Thank you. Council, we do have some other business on the agenda before we come back to this development application.
Point of order?
And yes, Councillor Duck.
May we take a 5-minute recess, please?
I will call a recess until 8:06. Thank you. Council, we will reconvene at 8:05. Thank you. We're now turning to Section 6 on our agenda, development permits and development variance permits. And under 6A, we have development variance permit application number DV100345 at 10125 3rd Street to relax siting requirements for detached detached accessory buildings in order to allow a greenhouse on the subject property. We have considered this at a previous meeting. We have provided notice to nearby residents. We've received no written submissions as of this evening, and we have a recommendation.
I'd like
Councillor
to
Dunn?
move the recommendation that DV application be approved.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Any discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. The next item, 6B, is development variance permit application number DV100346 at 2243 Weiler Avenue to reduce the minimum setback to Highway 17 in order to allow a detached accessory building on the subject property. Again, we've discussed at a previous meeting. Notice has been sent to neighboring residents. We've received no written submissions as of this evening, and we have a recommendation.
I'd like to move the recommendation the DV application be approved.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We're now turning to Section 7, adoption of minutes, and if I can have a mover that the minutes of our regular council meeting on October 10th and the minutes of our special council meeting on October the 16th be adopted.
So moved.
We have it moved and seconded. Are there any corrections? Seeing none, all in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We're now turning to the mayor's report. We do have the CRD board highlights from September 13th. I don't have anything I wish to highlight further. I think the highlights are very informative, and so we are receiving that on our agenda this evening. I will turn to council reports, and the first, I'll turn to Councillor Duncan, who is our representative on the Victoria Airport Authority Noise Committee. Councillor Duncan will also be providing a CRD Regional Water Commission update and a CRD Saanich Peninsula wastewater Commission's update. Councillor Duncan, if you would pause after each of your updates, if there might be any questions from colleagues.
Sure thing. Sorry, I had so many on a long night. My report from the Airport Noise Committee is brief. There were piles of soil that were along the Ocean Avenue there, and they have been moved. Some of the residents who live in that area may have noticed the construction noises. There was a problem with construction beeps that was reported to the airport. However, the construction company was able to mitigate that and either turn those off or muffle them, and nobody has reported a problem since then. So I hope that worked for the residents that were there. Runway construction will continue through 2024, and our next update on how that will be going to proceed will be at the next Airport Noise Committee meeting. And just a kind of a final call to say that the noise complaint line that the airport has will be disconnected at the end of 2023. It will be text and email complaints only now. It still goes to a live person who will still get them directly to her email and be able to respond right away. Everyone just found it was better for the staff if they received people who'd had a chance to think about their complaint and write it down before they spoke to them and received them. The 443 Squadron and the flight school will be doing night flights again. 443 had stopped for a while and will be finally ramping up again after all this time with COVID. And so people may hear plane noises again after dark. However, the school doesn't fly after 10 p.m., so hopefully that will be helpful to the residents in the area. If anybody has questions about the Airport Noise Committee, I'll take them now.
I'll turn to colleagues. Seeing no questions, please continue.
All right, moving right along. We'll kind of cover the CRD water and Saanich Peninsula water in one. I guess it's just a notice that everybody who is in Sydney, and I think North Saanich as well, received probably a notice about the water when there was a break in our line 4 on September 8th. That was fixed within 3 days, which was amazing. And so I did want to bring this up as one of those CRD services because we had the CRD come to our last council meeting and talk about what they did, and they weren't able to go into a lot of detail with everything they do, but one of the kind of amazing things about having our CRD water was that they had a stockpile of all of the equipment that they needed, all the materials, that if they'd had to order them and they didn't have stockpiles, would have taken, 4, 6, 8 weeks, possibly longer. Everybody knows what that's like now. And so what could have been a really disastrous situation for us was able to be repaired very quickly. We also have in-house crews that had trained for this kind of entry situation and really difficult work. And so we were able to do it with our own, the internal CRD staff. The new director was saying that the new manager was saying that she'd spoken to colleagues in Ontario from larger municipalities who said they wouldn't have even had people. They would have just had to get contractors. So that's a considerable advantage we have being on the island, and that was really great to hear. They have identified, this was an identified risk for us here on the peninsula, having this one water line. And so one of the major capital repairs that's in our 5-year plan for this year, it's about almost half of the value of the 5-year plan, is putting in the rest of the diversion system and up to the Bear Hill pumping station and reservoir there. And so that will hopefully mean that in the future we'll have increased redundancy there. And actually, maybe I'll stop and see if anybody had questions about the line 4 and the Bear Hill interconnect before I went on to the budget.
Thank you for the update. Any questions on CRD water?
Okay.
Peninsula water? Seeing none. Thank you.
No. Well, and now I have the I provided this as a written report because it's just a lot of numbers, and conscious of time, I won't just read it out. Though I know not everyone necessarily would have had time to read it before the meeting because it was late. But there will be, of course, a bulk water rate increase, though inflationary costs were capped for all CRD projects at 3.5%. There are primarily staffing. There's a new union contract that increased staffing costs going forward. And chemicals now are about 30 to 40% more expensive than they were prior to the pandemic. So that adds some of our costs for water treatment and for wastewater treatment as well, actually. The similar level in increase in costs. We've also added staff in addition to the staff contract increases because we've increased the services. And we're having to share costs with the core wastewater treatment, even though we have our own Saanich Peninsula wastewater because of the way we're sharing how the biosolids will be managed.
Thank you.
So I'll see if anyone has questions on that report based on, I guess, the written or what you've heard me say.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Seeing no questions, thank you for your reports, and we'll now turn to Councillor Garnett with a verbal report from the Sidney Museum Archives.
Thank you, Mayor. Attended the latest board meeting on October 21st. Just some rough financial numbers. Museum's visitor donations continue to be really doing well this year. As of end of September, they're just over $42,000, which is more than $5,000 more than they'd budgeted for, and they still have 3 months to go. Although October and November generally tend to be a little downtime, so it's good that they have that buffer. And they have a net income at the end of September of slightly more than $19,000. They've welcomed almost 12,000 visitors for the year. And as a sort of a shout out for the outreach and volunteer coordinator, Charlotte Clark, they set up a booth at the Sydney Street Market, and they engaged with 3,719 people. So I mean, that's for them. This is a big deal, and it just gets their name out there with so many people being at the markets. So really great idea on their part, and great on her part to be bringing that forward with her volunteers. And just a brief update as far as the waterfront signage project goes. As you may remember, the decision was made to not to change the sponsorship that they were allowed to use, and just wanted to update council that even with that being passed on to the people that were putting forward to want to be part of that sponsorship package, they've still accrued $6,500 of a commitment from those organizations. Some went up, some individuals came forward, and they're still waiting to hear back from 4 of the 9 that are originally committed. So it could still even be more. So that's a positive thing that's happened. As far as events in the museum, the laundry room exhibit continues to go on. It will run to the end of November. As part of the exhibit, the museum will be hosting some workshops and demonstrations. Myself and Councillor Duck attended the Meet the Artists and an ironing demonstration on October 15th, and it was a real eye-opener. I can tell you, I can't even imagine having to carry this massively heavy piece of metal and have it be just the right temperature, and you have to put it on something hot And if it's not the right temperature, it ruins the fabric or it doesn't do anything. So for however many hours a day people did this, it's like, we were both like, wow, like kudos to people that did that for a living. So going forward this Thursday at 2 p.m. October 26th, there will be a folding and packing demonstration. I'm sure my wife would like me to attend that one. Saturday, November 4th at 2 p.m. there will be a workshop on crafting peg dolls. Apparently this was popular with Victorian area children. So the little pegs you don't clotheslines, you make them into dolls. So there you go. On Thursday, November 9th at 2 p.m. there will be a demonstration on darning and mending. And finally on Saturday, November 18th at 2 p.m. there will be a workshop on soap carving. So Steve, you and I maybe again. And lastly, I just want to comment on the Halloween. So from October 1st, which has already started, to October 31st, there is a historical Halloween hunt with 16 jack-o'-lantern pictures, each representing a different Halloween tradition hidden around the museum. If you find all 16, you can be entered to win a spooktacular prize. And also the museum will be participating in Treat Street again on October 31st from 4:30 to 6. And that's all for me. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett, for your positive reports and a little levity. Seeing no questions, we'll turn to Councillor Novek for his verbal report as our representative on the Vancouver Island Regional Library Board and with Peninsula, liaison to Peninsula Literacy.
And Mr. Mayor, if it is okay with you, I'd also like to add a very quick comment on Peninsula Chamber of Commerce at the end, which is also in my portfolio. I assure you it'll all be very quick. For VRL, Vancouver Island Regional Libraries, the budget for 2024 has been approved. It's a $38 million budget with $32.5 million in levies. The balance is in grants and local revenues, as it was unanimously passed. There has been a financial turnaround. At the end of last year, there was a financial crunch. To make that story very short, issues were revealed and the CFO was terminated. There has been a search going on in the interim for a new CFO. Additional staff reductions helped to relieve financial pressure. The board also adopted a new reserves contribution and reporting framework that'll better align with local government practice. What happened was we discovered that all of the reserves that showed on the financial statements were unfunded. In other words, there was no cash available for those reserves. How that happened, the CFO was terminated. That gives you some idea. With that framework, VRL will gradually close a gap between legacy unfunded reserves and unrestricted deficit and available cash. There's a new library in Moffatt that has been that has had the construction commenced. It'll be a 3,870 square foot library and combination community center, $4.2 million budget. And new auditors have been appointed for VRL, who are Grant Thornton. I'll pause if there are any questions about VRL.
Seeing no questions, thank you for that update.
Oh,
Councillor O'Keefe.
Wait, I'm sorry, I'm not.
No, Councillor O'Keefe is going to ask you a question
Oh,
on
I'm
Virl.
sorry.
About Virl.
Sorry, go ahead.
So, I get, that is a concern about the reserve fund. So was that a case that they were the statements in the past have shown that there were funds in those reserves, but they actually weren't put into the reserves? Or was it a case that nobody ever put money into the reserve funds?
The money was there, dating back to, I think it was 2007. Around, at that point, or maybe it was 2008, thereabouts, there were sufficient funds to cover the reserves. But over a long period of time, a lot of those funds were spent in, to the best of our knowledge, there was no defalcation or fraud or anything like that going on, but the money was spent in operating costs, and the expenses were not applied to the reserve. So the cash that had been set aside for reserves started to go down. They spent the money sort of to balance the budget, but then the reserve fund went down. The asset side of the reserve part was still there, but there was no countervailing cash available. And so that, over a period of a number of years, those reserves, those actual cash reserves to fund the accounting cash reserves started to go down to the point where now there's, I don't know, there's $8 or $10 million in accounting reserves with no funds to match them. So we've started a program now of refunding those reserves, and over a period of time will allow those funds to catch back up.
Okay, so that sounds to me like the board, is a board issue then, in terms of they must have received financial statements, and I guess the long and short of it is the board is aware of it now and is attending to it.
Yes, and there was a new executive director, I think 2 years ago. Ben is now into his second or third year, and it was with the old board, the old executive director, and we sort of found ourselves confronted with this bit of an accounting mess, and we've had to take steps to turn it around. And I'm satisfied that it will turn around with the steps that are being taken.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Keefe. Please continue, Councillor Novek.
Peninsula literacy, this is a quick one. The lady who was the literacy outreach coordinator for Peninsula Literacy, Chantal Slate, has decided to move on, and the organization is now looking for a new person to fill that role. Chantal will stay on to help with the transition. There were a number of literary events this summer, notably at Pioneer Park and at Iroquois Park. They were called Head Out and Read. There was a Play in the Park program with Panorama Rec Center, and a number of smaller programs throughout the year. If you want more details, please get a hold of me offline. I can provide that information to you. And any questions on literacy?
Not seeing any. Thank you for those updates, Councillor Novek.
I have just one more quick one, like I said.
Yes, on the chamber, please.
So for Chamber of Commerce, it's a bit of a conundrum. We've had no contact. I've had no contact from the Chamber since May. 2 emails in the last month to Executive Director have gone unanswered. Council liaisons are not permitted to attend Chamber of Commerce meetings. In the past, when we have attended meetings, and I say we, I'm talking about my colleagues as well in North Saanich and Central Saanich, we've been asked to provide council reports and then asked to leave before the actual meeting starts. We have been invited to a few meet and greets, or actually there was only one, and that was in May. My question is whether or not council would support a motion arising to remove the Peninsula Chamber of Commerce from council liaison appointments, because it just doesn't seem to have any worth either to council or to the chamber.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Novek. We do have a process in the first week, the meeting in the first week of December. We will be reviewing council appointments. I'll be providing that to council for approval, and we could discuss that at that time.
Fair enough.
Any questions on the chamber update, colleagues?
I'm done, thank you.
Thank you for the updates. So we're now turning to item 12A, which is the minutes of our committee of the whole meeting of October 16th. There are no recommendations, so we're receiving those minutes on our agenda this evening. I'm turning to 12B now, which is the minutes of the Advisory Planning Commission meeting of February 21st, and I'll turn to our council liaison to the APC, Councillor O'Toole, to consider the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Mayor. The staff recommendation here is to refer this item for discussion under item 13A. I'm comfortable with that. I don't know that it needs a motion, so to speak.
Do we have a second there?
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor? The motion carries, thank you. So we're now turning to item 13A under staff reports, which is the zoning amendment application and development permit application for 2180 Beacon Avenue West. We do have a staff report, and I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please. Good evening, Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. Good evening. This is a follow-up report on the zoning amendment application and development permit application for the property at 2180 Beacon Avenue West. As it says in this report, this application was reviewed by Committee of the Whole much earlier this year and also by the Advisory Planning Commission. When the application was reviewed after Committee of the Whole, it went to Council January 23rd, where three resolutions were made by Council. One was to refer it to APC. One was for staff to consult with the CRD on the proposed affordability component of the development and then report back to Council concurrently with the APC minutes with more recommendations on the affordability component. And also that staff analyze the need for infrastructure and parks requirements, I'm paraphrasing there, and report back again concurrently with the recommendation from APC. So that's why all three things are coming back tonight in this staff report. The report then goes on to give comments on infrastructure needs in the neighborhood and parks needs in the neighborhood, and also comments on the affordable housing proposal. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. I'll turn to colleagues if there are questions. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you. Through you to staff, could you speak to two items? Number one is the, I guess, change in approach since we last saw this that I think staff are taking to Jahn Place and developing it for future access and egress, because I'm not sure that previously it was as clear as that. In fact, I think we all understood that the potential for future highway needs with respect to an overpass, something of that nature, may impact this location. But I think it was one of the greatest concerns we heard from residents on Jahn Place. So I guess why at this time we've gone to taking a slightly different approach. At least that's my perspective on the recommendations and the approach now. The second item would be if you could just speak to the developer seems content, with the 30-year rental covenant. How did we go from 30-year rental and then the below market element at 20 years versus matching that 30 years? If you could just speak to those two items, please. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Through the Mayor to Councillor Rintoul. So regarding Jahn Place first, I'm just opening up the staff report that went to Committee of the Whole in January, and I believe it was addressed the same way in the staff report. There, towards the end of the report about the traffic and transportation section, there is a comment in there about it. So what this report on today's agenda says is that it's currently designed, the driveway access onto Jahn is currently designed as a secondary access for emergency vehicles only to go into there. What we are looking for, though, is for that driveway to be designed for future use, to be opened up in the future, so that if at some point the intersection of Beacon Avenue West and the highway changes, if Ministry of Transportation comes in and puts in an interchange, or if some other change happens on Beacon Avenue West that would prevent that Beacon driveway from being used, then this Jahn Place driveway wouldn't have to be modified in the future. If you look at the site plan, it shows a pad-mounted transformer in close proximity on the north side of the driveway. Moving a hydro PMT is a big deal, and that's expensive. So we're looking to have that driveway designed properly now, so that if in the future, 30, 40, who knows how many years down the road, it could be used for that all-vehicle access if the Beacon driveway does have to be closed off at some point.
Okay, and if I can follow up on that prior to addressing the other question, then in the meantime, that area would be blocked for emergency access only with a bollard or something of that nature that fire crews or emergency crews can
That's right.
remove.
Yeah. something like that, some type of bollard or something that would prevent regular passenger vehicles from going through, but that emergency vehicles would have a key or some access to that it could be removed for emergency access for fire trucks, et
Thank
cetera.
you. So the second part of the question, if you don't mind, the 20 versus 30 years.
Sure. So the original proposal was, just going to it here. So back in January, the original proposal was that the full building would be rental for a minimum of 10 years, 140 units rental, market rental. 20% of the units would be 20% below market rent for a minimum of 10 years. So they've increased that full building rental period to 30 years. And they're proposing to increase the below market rent to 20 years. The CRD commented that they felt that was a very reasonable proposal. And that was they felt that would be a benefit to the community and is on par, if not better, with what they're seeing other affordable housing below market proposals around the CRD. So that's why that's why we're bringing this forward now, rather than 30 years full building purpose-built rental and 30 years below market. We felt the 30 and 20 was a good compromise.
Okay, thank you for that. If I may, just one further, I guess just a point of clarification through the mayor to staff. We're seeing here both the zoning amendment application and recommendations in relation to that, but also then a series of separate recommendations in relation to the development permit application. Do we need to address both of those tonight? Meaning, I understand if we start down the path of the zoning amendment application, that begins a process with the community and opportunities for further input specifically around the zoning amendment application. So I get that. In this case, I wonder if the discussion around the specific development permit application is certainly very, very detailed and may evolve somewhat through the other process. And so I just wanted to clarify, I know we've seen it addressed this way before. Have we seen them addressed separately? I'm not advocating for it, I'm just asking the question.
That is a good question. The applicant was advised to bring forward a development permit application along with the zoning amendment so that council and the community could get a clear picture of what was proposed in terms of what were the specifics, what are the specifics for the project, so people could thoroughly understand why the zoning amendment is proposed. And I can't speak for the developer, obviously, but from my perspective, from a staff perspective, the conditions of zoning might be different if it's a different development, like if the building is redesigned, if council, again, this is my comment, if you're looking to approve a zoning bylaw or consider taking a zoning amendment forward for the next step, but not moving forward with the design of the project and looking for a different design, that could change what's up for offer from the developer in terms of how the project is viable or not. Yeah, that's my comment. And the design has been reviewed against the town's OCP design guidelines for this type of multi-unit residential development. So if the development permit doesn't keep moving forward with this, it would be reviewed against the same things again, and we've already done that review.
Okay. Thank you for that. That helps. And thank you for the confirmation that it's not the town's near-term intent or long-term intent independently to use Jahn Place for access and egress, and that would be driven by the province as opposed to the town. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. I'll turn to Councillor Duck and then Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff, just to clarify from Councillor Rintoul's question about the traffic on Jahn. So there's going to be no egress or ingress from this complex onto Jahn it's only emergency vehicles, just to be clear that the only in and out is going to be onto Beacon West.
Through the mayor to Councillor Duck, that's true for vehicles. Obviously, pedestrians and bicycles would go where they go, but passenger vehicles belonging to tenants in the building would be only Beacon Avenue, right in, right out from Beacon.
Okay. Thank you. Follow on to that is what, from the public presentation comments today, there was a comment on just the condition of Jahn. If that's to change, has there some thought been given to how that would change the design of John that would accommodate outflow that way, and can the road handle that load?
Again, through the mayor, the West Side Local Area Plan has road designs for this area, cross-section, kind of standard cross-sections for the side streets in this neighborhood as they get built out. This development, as it says in the report, would be responsible for building to the center line, not for building out down Jahn Place, because there's no changes proposed on the other properties down there, just on its own frontage. Part of that work would involve removing that cul-de-sac island in the terminus there to make way for emergency vehicles to access the site.
Thank you. Are you, with the noise study that the proponent did, are you happy with that, and any noise and air attenuation there, that they've met that need?
Through the mayor to council. Staff are not experts in noise attenuation, so we are trusting the professionals in that regard.
Okay, thank you. And my last, we referred the report from the APC with recommendations. Have you resolved those to your comfort level?
Could you please repeat that question?
So we just recently passed and moved the recommendation that APC put forward back in February as to 2 recommendations they presented with sections to them. Have you reviewed those and are comfortable that the proponent is meeting those recommendations or responding to them appropriately?
My understanding of council's resolution was that you didn't approve APC's recommendations, you just referred it to this staff report.
Right.
So APC raised concerns, as was identified by Councillor Rintoul, the liaison to APC. As it says in the minutes from there, they had concerns about the layout of the building and the design of it, and noise onto the balconies. And those have been addressed by the applicant. If you read the staff report to APC, it found that development was in compliance with the overwhelming majority of the design guidelines. So we weren't recommending, staff were not recommending the development be redesigned to meet those things. They have addressed what they could in terms of the layout of the building, and it is broken up into different areas as the architect indicated. So,
thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff, I just have a couple questions in it, tying into to Jahn Place again. And I appreciate what staff's recommending here, because I think it's actually smart going forward based on the fact that at some point that intersection is going to have to be dealt with. So to not have to come back and uproot and lift things out of the ground is probably good planning, I would say. And I look at the street and listen to the comments from the speaker earlier, and I'm very familiar with the street. Lots of small children and seniors, and as she had indicated. And now with 2114 Beacon for sale, and likely to possibly, given its proximity to the roundabout, also probably have that Jahn Place. And knowing how hard it would be to turn left if you happen to be leaving when Amazon's all leaving. I wonder, and I realize you spoke to the West Lap and what's kind of planned there. I wonder if you could speak to what might trigger, in terms of not this development, but looking forward, a sidewalk for that street. And I don't think it was in our active transportation plan as a sidewalk priority, but given how this might build out in the not too distant future, I'd like to hear staff's perspective on that.
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, we typically wait for development to happen before getting those frontage improvements constructed. A developer or property owner would be required to build out their frontage on their property. If council wanted to identify a sidewalk to be built out as part of a capital project, that would be a separate budgeting project.
Awesome, thank you very much. And just one more, if I may, Mayor.
Please.
With regards to recommendation 3H, register a noise covenant acknowledging industrial and airport noise and activity, which has been referred to by the proponent. Does staff see any value in potentially, I don't know if this is normal procedure, adding in highway noise to that as well, because I have real concerns about that particular aspect based on the information gathered, and as I spoke to earlier about the buffer not being there anymore, and what the noise is actually going to be like for people who live particularly towards the end of the Beacon intersection.
Thank you. That is a good question. And the reason for the noise covenant is really to minimize potential future complaints from those residents coming into the site. Victoria Airport Authority participated in the Westside Local Area Plan process back in 2016, 2017. And this was one of their main requests, if we were going to be increasing density in this area, was to make sure people are aware of the airport's operations. And the same with the businesses in the industrial area, like they're a big contributor to the community. Yeah. So we need to acknowledge that that noise is there and those uses are there first. The highway, I mean, that's there too. So maybe that could be added to the covenant as well as an existing noise in the area. We'd have to check.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Having brought that forward, it could be a consideration when the motion, when the staff recommendation is put on the floor, if you wish to amend that particular covenant. I'll turn to other questions from councillors of staff. Seeing none, Council, I want to speak to process for just a moment for ourselves, but also for the benefit of residents who may be watching this meeting or watching at a later time. Is that the staff recommendation? The first part of the staff recommendation is with regards to the zoning amendment bylaw. And so the recommendation is indicating, if we pass this recommendation, that the zoning amendment bylaw would be brought forward to a future meeting, and council would, at that time, when it's brought forward to at a future meeting, would consider giving first and second reading. If it passed first and second reading, council would then be giving consideration and approval to staff scheduling a public hearing. The public hearing is a requirement for the zoning amendment. Through one of the questions that Councillor Rintoul asked, there is also a development permit application, and upon the zoning amendment application, if it were to be approved by council at after the public hearing, then council would consider approval of the development permit application. If council did not approve the zoning amendment application, we would not consider the development approval application. So there's a process that will take place through future meetings, but I just wanted to clarify that. I think staff has spoken to Councillor Rintoul's question about the recommendations pertaining to the zoning amendment, but also those pertaining to the development permit application. But those all would be subject to approval of the zoning amendment application. So I just wanted that clarification. So I have conferred with staff, and that if someone would like to move this recommendation, we're not required to read a page and a half into the record this evening. You could move the recommendation as written in the agenda. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
I will move the recommendation as written into the agenda.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. I will turn to the mover and seconder first.
Thank you. I appreciate the mayor having addressed process, because it does help identify both to council and the community that this has been before us previously at committee of the whole through the Advisory Planning Commission and referred back here to council, and this paves the way for the change to the zoning potentially, and the process for notifying residents and for their input at a public hearing if first and second reading at that time are successful and move this forward. So we're at a place point in a process, and I would encourage the community to continue their interest and involvement in this matter. I would just comment that as one of the elements within the motion, I'd like to make sure that staff are comfortable with it, so I'll hold that perhaps if you'd like, or I can ask it now if you're comfortable with it.
The motion's on the floor. Questions while the motion is on the floor are certainly appropriate.
So if I can, through to staff, under recommendation 4A on page 4 of the agenda package, 4A2 refers to submit a revised site plan showing a modified driveway entrance onto Jahn Place, allowing two-way traffic movement, both to the satisfaction of the Director of Development Services. I take it, and just for clarity, again, with your earlier comments, that the intent behind that is to leave it closed for emergency services access only, and that would be the lens at which this is reviewed through. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to the seconder, Councillor Garnett.
Sorry, Mayor, I'm just wondering if now would be time to potentially add the 3H highway noise, or would you like that to be done?
Please proceed.
I would like to add highway noise to 3H in the recommendations.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Staff are comfortable with inserting the word highway in reference to industrial, airport, and highway noise and activity.
Thank you.
Okay, we have it moved and seconded. Any further discussion? I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you, Councillor Garnett. So we now have an amended motion on the floor.
And speaking to the...
We're back to the main motion. As amended.
Sorry, back to the main motion. As far as process goes, I think it's important to move this forward to the public hearing stage eventually, potentially. I think that'll give plenty of opportunity for the community to offer their input. And I would just add as an aside, with regard to this, it's not, I'm quite cognizant of the fact that we're not living in normal times for development applications and zoning amendments, with federal government and provincial governments weighing into the discussion. And I could see a development like this being on the provincial government's radar. We like to think that we're a small community and that nobody notices us, but I think Burnaby and Surrey found out from the federal Minister of Housing that they are noticed, and their funding for the Housing Accelerator Fund was paused because of DCC fees that went up in Metro Vancouver. So I do think that they're aware of what we're doing, and we actually have an application in the pipeline. Haven't heard back yet from the Housing Accelerator Fund, and I think these are the kind of developments that they're looking to communities to be following through a process and taking a serious look at. So I think it's important for us as a council to show that initiative and show the senior levels of government that we're serious about housing in our community, and we'll do a deep look on anything that comes forward before us. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to other speakers. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'll support this going forward, although I have reservations, and we'll see what we eventually decide to do after we hear from the public. My concerns are around the fact that I totally am cognizant of the costs of construction and the challenges that they face, but you know, what I picked up in our conversation is that it seemed to me that there was some potential for them to reduce costs, and things like smaller units, less bathrooms, and you know, the take that I have on it is that instead of looking at what is a need for our community now in terms of workforce housing, is they're looking at the long-term picture in terms of their investment. Fair enough. And so these were designed more for larger units, 2 bathrooms, that sort of thing, because those would be easier to sell later on. So I would have liked to see, you know, when I'm looking at whether to go along with such a significant rezoning, I'm looking at what are we getting out of this in terms of the needs in our housing needs. So I don't know that I'm completely satisfied with what's proposed in terms of meeting the needs for people here. We certainly need 140 units, no doubt about that, but the size of them was the issue for me, which impacts the cost. There also seemed to be some potential to reduce things, as another councillor brought up the impacts of the recent GST implications. Also have concerns about, you know, we're putting this out there. It's mentioned several times in the report, and marketing or putting it out there that these are affordable units, you know, that affordable is mentioned several times. And it's not really, you know, they're 20% below market. So to say that this is a significant benefit to the community because we're offering affordable units, not so much the case. So those are my reservations at this time, and but I will support the motion to move it forward and hear what the public has to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Mayor. Equally, I'll support this for the process moving forward, but I too have my concerns, and I think they'll be echoed by the community when they get a chance to look at this, around the design, the rents, and I think to some extent just the impact this will have. Certainly it will have an impact. Certainly we need it. I recognize that. But I think that the proponent can do more to make this fit better with the community, and in both affordability and design. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I will also support this moving forward to the next step. I think one of the things we'll be considering going forward, and I'm hoping when the community comes forward with their comments, is that when we're looking at applications, we're not always just looking at whether this is what we're getting, whether the developer is coming forward with a project that is meeting what the town would build if the town was a land developer and was going to try to build things just to meet our needs. But we're looking at what essentially a business is allowed to do with the zoning regulations that are set up in a town. And that's just the way the laws about real estate and development in British Columbia and perhaps the whole developed world have been set up. And so I would not like to go forward with the expectation that if people didn't like it, that automatically meant that council would be obligated to say no. And I also, because I think our boundary of action has to do with whether the proponent is following what the town has specified in its long-term plans, like the West Side Plan, and our official community plan. And increasingly we have this difficulty where our guidelines have to be permissive to a fairly good extent to allow developers and businesses the leeway to come up with new ways of doing things, and not restrict them from being able to build what they might need to meet their business objectives, their income objectives as profit-making companies. And so I'm very torn in how to properly assess this and how to properly balance not penalizing developers or holding them to standards that are excessive of what a town is supposed to according to the laws that we set out when we, evaluate what is built. And yet at the same time also knowing what communities need throughout Canada, and how we can better obtain that within the paradigm that we're operating, and to try not to make the perfect the enemy of the possible at this point. So thank you to the developer for a very lengthy kind of discussion about how decisions are made, right, about how people decide what they're going to build, and how they're restricted in that sense in their paradigm of how they approach things as well, because it's useful for everyone to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor Novek.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to support the project at this stage anyway, for a very simple reason. The town needs the project. I appreciate the developer going through a lot of trouble to explain their wherefores and whys to us. And our concerns about the economics, I think, are justified. I think the numbers are high. I think it's anything but an affordable project. However, the good thing about capitalism and the free market is that the market will ultimately determine whether or not their market, quote unquote, market rates are indeed market rates. And if they are, well, then the developer stands to benefit. If they're not, then the public stands to benefit. Either way, this is a good project for the town. We need the apartments. We need them in that area. So I'm quite happy to see this on its first step through the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novek. I'll be the last to speak on this. I'm supportive of taking the next step in the process. I want to thank the proponent for their detailed presentation and Q&A when it came to Committee of the Whole earlier this year. We're appreciative, Council is appreciative of the work that the Advisory Planning Commission did in making its, doing its review and making its recommendations to Council. I want to thank staff. As Council is aware, staff prepares a more detailed report, particularly with regards to development permit guidelines for APC, and we have access to that report as well. The detailed staff report, some 7 pages that staff provided for Council this evening. We had a lengthy presentation. We heard from 2 residents this evening. We had our own lengthy Q&A with the applicant, and then staff introduction and questions. So we've been through the first few steps in the process. I think we're doing our due diligence. We know the need for all types of housing in our community, particularly rental, and I'm very pleased to see that the change from the last time this was before Council is now for 30 years as rentals and 20 years as below market rentals. And so there is additional steps in the process, as I've indicated, and additional opportunities for residents to come forward or members of the community to come forward with their views. I'll leave my remarks there for this evening and ask one more time for any further discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And the motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We're now turning to staff report under 13B, which is the Beacon Wharf inspection report, and I'll turn to staff for an introduction. Good evening, Ms. Clary.
Good evening. Thank you. So this report is being brought forward because, as a result of previous direction of Council, the Beacon Wharf was inspected earlier this year by McElhaney, who is a reputable engineering firm in Western Canada. They did conduct a survey or an inspection over 3 days, and they confirmed that the wharf was in fair condition. There are a few urgent repairs that staff are have either already completed or are completing in the near future using existing operating budgets, and there will be a number of items that require repair in the next 3 years. McElhaney is recommending that the wharf be inspected every 3 years, so the next inspection would be 3 years from now, and the next repair project could be modified based on that inspection. As a result of this, of these findings, we are recommending that the existing commercial leases on the wharf be extended to the end of 2026, with the option to extend further based on the next inspection. I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. I'll turn to colleagues. First turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, staff, Ms. Clary, for your report. I have to say that the vast majority of the McElhaney report was really hard for me to read because it's way over my head. Engineers are in another league. First question, with regards to page 8, with regards to page 18, they mention in terms of the cost, it's mentioned early on that they recommended putting a load rating sign, and I don't see that mentioned in the description on table 5 for priority items and costs. Is that something that we're going to pursue, or was it something the staff didn't really feel was necessary?
Through to Councillor Garnett, I believe that's referring to vehicle traffic on the wharf and vessels mooring. Is that what you are referring to?
No, they were talking about something completely different. It's something about a load rating sign as you approach, as you're coming in off. I'm assuming that's to what, delivery vehicles, maybe something like that. Sorry, for the fish market, I imagine. And I'm just wondering if it's a recommend. It's not in the little table they have, but it's something they talk about earlier on in the report. Sorry if I don't have the actual page number here. Lost it. You find it? I know I saw it there. It said that they recommended putting up a load rating sign, and it doesn't appear later on. So I was wondering if that's something we were going to pursue. There it is on page 11 of their report. Consideration should also be given to posting a load rating sign.
Through to Councillor Garnett, that's not something we are doing at this time. We will be putting signage up to discourage boats from mooring on the wharf, and we will continue to restrict vehicle access to the wharf. Okay.
My next question centers around just on page 2. It says complete more extensive repairs in approximately 3 years. So is the approach, based on what they've said here, over 1 to 3 years to like bring forth budget items for these medium items, sort of like 24, 25, 26, so that they'll all be completed by the end of that 3-year term?
Through to Councillor Garnett, no, we think that this can be done as one large project.
Oh, okay.
And we did have a conversation with McElhaney about it, and they recommend doing the subsequent inspection in 3 years. Things can change dramatically with marine structures like this, so the tender can be modified based on that next inspection. Really, the key there is that there's nothing urgent. It's not like at 3 years it'll, something will break. But if the wharf was impacted by something in that time, we may have to do something earlier than that 3-year period. But it's really unknown at this time.
If I may, with regards to the fender piles. Again, not being an engineer, but when I look at the photographs of them and showing the kind of deteriorated condition of them, are there any concerns that not repairing them might cause any dam or any structural integrity issues for other parts of the wharf?
Through to Councillor Garnett, the fender piles are no longer used for vessel berthing, so it was McElhaney's recommendation that they do not require repair at this time.
So, no, okay. And one last question, if I may. Given the recommendation that's put in the report that to extend the leases, I'm wondering on page 9, sorry, the microphone, page 9, it mentions that as a sort of saying areas that were included in inspection, the fish market and restaurant, including the inside of the buildings. Given that we're considering extending the leases by 2 years, do we feel that we maybe should conduct an inspection just for the safety of people who go into the buildings?
Through to Councillor Garnett, there's no reason to believe they're unsafe. Nothing's been reported by the tenants in the building, so we would expect them to bring it forward if they had concerns.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett, for your questions. Are there any further questions? If not, I'll turn to a mover of the recommendation, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you. I'll move the recommendation that staff be authorized to offer a 2-year extension of the existing commercial leases to the end of 2026 to the current leaseholders, with the potential for future extensions based on future condition inspections of the wharf in 2026.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm pleased that that we're able to offer some reassurance to the public who use the wharf as an amenity, and to the businesses that are on the wharf to alleviate any of their anxiety in terms of their business plans, that we're able to move forward with an extension of their leases. So pleased to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Turn to seconder.
Only just to comment that we're not going to inspect it for 3 years. Why are we not extending the leases for 3 years? Comparable basis, just a question through the staff maybe.
Well, sorry, just for clarification, is that the leases were extended until 2024?
Yeah.
Which is
Okay.
beyond
Correct.
beyond the
Yes.
inspection report of this year, so it's just aligning with
Yeah,
the,
thank you.
no problem, we're all good.
Nothing to add.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question, all in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you, and thank you to staff. We're now turning to item 13C, which is the Economic Development Strategy Implementation Approach, and I'll turn to, I believe, Mr. Newcomb for an introduction, please.
Thank
Good
you, Mr.
evening,
Mayor.
Newcomb.
Good evening. So this report just provides an overview of the implementation plan for the town's economic development strategy. So it was adopted on January 23rd of this year, and at the same meeting, Council asked staff to report back on initiatives that could be brought forward for implementation. So this report has done that, and broadly it follows the 3 broad areas of focus in the strategy. Details each of the 14 subcategories for actions that are detailed in the economic development strategy. And some of these are one-time projects, some will be ongoing. Quite a few of the initial focus will be on housing, and some of these will be solely delivered by the town. Some will require partnerships with other organizations, and some rely on completely other organizations to deliver. So I won't go through all of the actions, but I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. I'll turn to colleagues if there are questions. Councillor Duncan.
I'll start because I had 2 and they're probably shorter than what Terry's probably going to ask there. One is, I think it's a typo. On page 3, it says, one, and let's see, we're looking at the employment lands redevelopment section 1.2.1. One option to increase permitting times, that's decreased, right? Okay. I thought, do we need to increase them for some reason? I don't understand. Okay, thank you.
That is indeed a typo. Thank you.
Good catch.
Thanks. And my second one was under childcare access, section 2.3.1. And of course, we know, the main problem with childcare is less the spaces available and more actually getting people to staff them. And so I highlighted the section on lowering regulatory barriers to childcare so that both market and non-market providers can effectively respond to demand. And so I'm wondering what of the regulatory barriers within the town would actually be helpful. I'm thinking that there's probably some for maybe those who provide home childcare, though, because the ones that I'm aware of for childcare operators in facilities, it normally has to do with just the requirements for the teachers and getting enough people who are actually ECE certified, and how the certification for that is difficult. So I'm just kind of looking at if there are what the options are within the town's purview, or if there are also ones from the province that the town might be aware of coming down.
Through the mayor to Councillor Duncan. Good question. So those, the comment there on lowering regulatory barriers is specific to municipal regulations, not provincial. I don't think there's a lot we could do about, for example, Island Health's ratios or something like that. I can't think of any off the top of my head at this moment, but the town has taken action on childcare in the past, specifically with daycares and residential buildings. We're quite a bit more permissive with those than other home occupations. We allow employees, for example, where we don't with other home occupations. So things like that, we just be focusing on going forward. If a daycare came to us with a specific issue, we'd definitely take a look at it and look how we can address it and help them to operate more efficiently.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe, who had her hand up next, and then Councillor Novek.
Okay, thank you. Actually, just going back to Councillor Duncan's point about the childcare, my recollection on a session that I went on childcare some time ago, maybe it was at UBCM or AVICC, but my recollection is, in terms of the regulatory issues, there seemed to be conflict between what was required, say, by Island Health or the province in regards to a home daycare, and then zoning bylaws that prohibited certain things that were required. But I can't remember what those were, but that's what I recall the context to be around, so maybe that will help staff in some way. I don't know, just a comment, not a question.
I'm happy to respond if.
Oh,
if,
okay,
so
sure.
6 years ago, 7 years ago, maybe, the town undertook a review of the provincial and island health regulations and specifically amended the zoning bylaw to match those. So it's very, very, it mirrors those regulations very closely. And I don't believe they've changed since then, so it's
okay.
it's quite highly aligned.
Okay, so maybe we're good. Okay, thank you. What's that? Don't get cheeky, or I'll take longer. So just sticking with questions for now. So I like on page 2 you comment about having an economic development section in the annual report. So I think that's a great thing to do. And I'm wondering, you've mentioned to highlight some of the key projects undertaken. Had you thought perhaps, aside from, saying we did this project, we did that project, whether any consideration given to any other sort of indicators, like in terms of number of businesses that started up, in what sectors, in what geographical area, just to give us a sense once a year of how, what the picture looks like, the business picture looks like in Sydney in terms of downtown, west side, Harbour Road, and the different sectors. So any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, we do have a small section in the annual report currently that talks about the number of business license issued, and I believe it focuses on the number of new business license issued as well. It would be great to be able to do that. We do need to take a look at the way that our system produces data to see if that's possible. In terms of, looking at the geographic areas too, the system might need to be linked to the mapping system, so I'm not sure whether that's currently possible or not. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely something we'd like to do. Whether or not the current system can do that is another question. And there's a comment in the report later on there about, whether or not looking at an upgrade to our system would be helpful in that regard, and whether or not that's worth it. And I think that's something we need to look into further.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and so I do see later in the report information about upgrading the business license system. And I presume staff will kind of absorb this and then come back to us if you think, if we need an upgrade to the system and there's financial implications for that, you'll come back, and so you don't need a recommendation from us to do that. Okay, that's good. I think in terms of, also had the same about the, so I'm gathering in regards to, I'm just at the top of page 3 again, on the option to decrease permitting times. And you mentioned something about delegating approval of that. So I guess, would you be looking for us to provide a motion to that effect if you wanted council direction specifically on that?
Yeah, that's right. If council wanted staff to look into that, we'd bring a report back once that's happened, yeah.
Okay, and I think that's it. I have comments and maybe some suggestions for changes, but I'll leave that for discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Sorry, on my speaking list, Councillor Novek.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you to staff, I think this is a great initiative. I'm really happy to see that this is, or at least that you're hitting the ground running. My only question at this point is about tourism. It seems to take a very small part relative to the overall economic development program, yet tourism drives a big chunk of the revenue coming into town, both for retail, accommodation, food service, marine, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious as to why the quote-unquote visitor economy doesn't have a little bit more elaboration as to the type of projects that would help to A, support the tourist economy, and B, generate greater numbers.
Through the Mayor to Councillor Novek. Yeah, I'm not sure. In the strategy, I only played a kind of a supporting role at that time when it was developed, so I'm not sure of any discussions that happened at that time. It might be reflective of the fact that I think we have a fairly well-developed business association that's doing quite a bit of work in this area already. I went through my report with the executive director several days ago, and yeah, a lot of the stuff that I think is in the strategy it seems like it's already in the works, and they're very aware of it and pushing it forward. So I would assume it's that, you know, things are already in motion in that area, and it needs less attention maybe than some other areas.
Okay, thanks for that answer. My only comment is I think that there's great opportunities there in addition to what's already on the ground.
Noted.
Thank you, Councillor Novek. Seeing no further speakers, I have a couple of questions, and that is, thank you for the report. Covers a lot of areas, and I will want to touch on a couple. I want to go back to childcare for a moment. And given staff and council are aware of the challenges of additional daycare being provided, is the staffing component, whether this report at some juncture would be updated, noting that. I think it's an important reference point. I realize it was noted when we did the daycare needs assessment jointly with other municipalities. And the second is just to take a slightly different attack than Councillor Novek with regards to visitor economy. Under visitor economy, the point 3.2.1, it says develop baseline visitor info, visitor and market information, and share with local operators. Tourism Vancouver Island can provide guidance, access, and operating expertise with consumer segmentation data and customer analytics. Generally, as we've gone through the process of this report, we've made reference, and it's again made reference in this document, to relationships with South Island Prosperity Project, with the Sydney Business Improvement Association, with the Chamber of Commerce. Here we're seeing a reference to Tourism Vancouver Island. But we really haven't touched on Destination Greater Victoria. I do appreciate that the third point under visitor economy does make reference to Destination Greater Victoria in terms of encouraging more businesses to join DGV, sort of thing. But I'm just, to what extent is this a living document, or when would it be revisited, given factors such as childcare, such as those certain points with regards to the visitor economy that might be amended in this document? Turn to Mr. Humble.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd have to go back and take a look at the content in the plan. I thought it was to be reviewed every 5 years? I'm not quite sure. I'd have to go back and look at it, but I thought it was 5-year increments in terms of review of the plan. If council wants to consider modifications or amendments to the plan and look at it on a more fluid basis, they can certainly do so. It's the prerogative of council. I would highlight that particular item, the lead is the SBIA, and so that's a matter we could certainly discuss with the SBIA as well and get their thoughts on that. And it's a good point with respect to Destination Greater Victoria, if that's a desire to have sort of a more of a focus on Destination Greater Victoria as part of the plan.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the response. I'm a little reluctant to suggest amendments. I mean, I think this is a full report, So I'll leave my comments there. I wouldn't want to try to amend it myself this evening, but I can consider that at a further time. I just think the relationship with Destination Greater Victoria, whether it's through the SBIA or otherwise, is important. They're an $11 million a year visitor economy organization that generates significant data. Recently, they've reached out to Peninsula stakeholders. Mr. Newcomb attended on behalf of, in his role, on behalf of the town of Sydney. We've had councillors attend at previous meetings, and I just think there's a relationship there to be further facilitated. I'll leave my comments there and turn to colleagues. Councillor Duck.
If there are no other questions, I'll proceed with the recommendation.
Please go forward.
And I so move that council endorse the approach to the economic development outlined in this report.
Second?
We have a moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover and seconder.
Yeah, I think we've got to get started, and I think Mr. Newcomb's given some direction to that. I would suggest that we not leave this as a 5-year plan. That 5-year plans have gone out the door with the most other things, and we should be looking at shorter terms just because of the changes we see in our community and our environment and economy, just as we've just discussed, rents, for example. So I would suggest that we want to be looking at a more robust review in short order, but I fully support this going forward and the aspects of doing it. And I will say that Mr. Newcomb will be, just a reminder to all my colleagues, that Mr. Newcomb will be part of the Economic Development Panel at the South Island Partnership and Local Leadership Day on November 21st. So he, along with the Economic Dev Officer from Souk and the City of Victoria, will be discussing economic development. So he'll have a chance to bring forward what we're doing in this town. So I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to the seconder.
I have nothing to add.
Okay, I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So I do have some other comments and perhaps recommendations for council's consideration. So the first one, getting to the reducing permitting times that staff mentioned, and they talked about the possibility of bringing something forward to council on that. So I think that's a good thing. So I would propose that I don't know how to. So we've endorsed the economic development outline in this report with
Sorry,
the following change.
Sorry, could I make
Sure.
a suggestion?
Sure.
That I don't know that, it could be a motion arising, is what I'm suggesting. So,
Oh, okay.
because this is giving, what you're suggesting, if we consider it an amendment, it's not an amendment to
Okay.
this plan.
It's additional.
It's giving direction to staff to bring
Okay.
something forward. So
Okay, sure.
that would be my rationale for a motion arising.
Okay, sure. Okay, I'll move ahead with things that I think are in the report that we might want to adjust. One of the things I was looking at was people initiatives on page 4 and workforce development and workforce inclusivity. And I agree with the approach that this is something that the business community should be focused on. It's not within the scope of the town's responsibilities to undertake initiatives to attract a workforce to specific businesses. And I think the Chamber and the SBIA get funding and they can go ahead and do that. The only thing I was going to suggest, I don't know if it needs an amendment or not, is whether we want to add in the Association of BC Marine Industries. And they play a significant role in the marine sector. I've had several meetings with them. They do a lot in terms of workforce development in their industry. They get involved in job fairs, market research, provide their members with a lot of funding on different programs available. So I'm wondering, maybe this should have been a question to staff, whether that's something we can just add them into there, or whether that's...
I think we've heard from staff that we can consider an amendment, but
Okay.
I'll turn back to staff.
So just for clarification, Mr. Mayor, Councillor O'Keefe, I'm sorry, just through the mayor, question of clarification for Councillor O'Keefe. Is the suggestion to modify, is it 2.1.1?
Yes, sir.
Suggesting?
Second, 2 point, oh, right, so just on, yeah, on page 4, it just says workforce development leads, SBA and chamber.
Sorry, can you turn to the actual clause? They're numerated. For example, I'm looking at 2.1.1. Is that the, on page 4?
Yeah, no, well, so I don't necessarily see them necessarily getting involved with that. I like the 2.1.1 the way it is. I was just looking
No, I'm
at,
asking which one you're referring, or you're
Which one?
referencing. Are you referencing a particular point, or are you looking
No.
at adding a new point?
adding them as a lead under workforce development. So
Okay.
all that I was proposing to do was add the Association of BC Marine Industries as a lead along with the SBIA and the chamber.
So thank you for the clarification, Councillor O'Keefe. I guess the issue, that's not an amendment to the approach. That's an amendment to the actual economic development strategy, and which has been adopted by council. So that would be my only point, I guess, is does council want to look at amending the economic development strategy this evening in terms of these changes, or focusing in on Mr. Newcomb's approach and looking at potential changes to his suggested approach. So again, that's a decision for council.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. Turn back to you. You
Yeah,
have the floor,
no, I
Councillor
guess, I just think that, you know, at the time that we hadn't really, when we formulated the economic development strategy, we didn't really have an opportunity to spend much time with Association of BC Marine Industries. And after having several meetings with them myself over the past year, and with Boating BC, and with other people in the marine sector, it seems a good idea to include them. And so I didn't realize that required a amendment to the strategy, but I don't think that it's a bad idea. So all I'm asking is that we include Association of BC Marine Industries as one of the leads in workforce development.
Go ahead.
Sure, I'm gonna ask a question,
Okay.
and you've posed a question, but I'm just gonna request additional clarification. Sorry, the organization's name again is?
The Association of BC Marine Industries
Where are they based?
in Sydney.
Okay, I'll turn to Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Following a recent meeting, which Councillor O'Keefe also attended and introduced me to the executive director of that organization, I've recently followed up with him and trying to set up a time to meet and sort of chat about the economic development strategy. So I'd be happy to raise these two categories and, you know, chat a little bit about them with him and see what initiatives could be brought forward going forward.
So, yeah, so
Councillor
that's maybe the better approach. Although I've talked to him, staff haven't. They've proposed some potential things that we could collaborate on. But perhaps before making amendments to the ED strategy itself, in terms of where the marine sector fits in, maybe it's better. Mr. Rubin from ABCMI has offered he would like to come and speak to council, hopefully sometime soon in November. So hopefully we can set that up so he can come and explain to council what ABCMI has to offer, what they might be interested in doing, and maybe that's the more appropriate time to consider amendments to the ED strategy in terms of the marine sector, if staff are okay with that approach.
Well, I think we've heard from staff that they are
Okay.
engaging, and we appreciate that you're not seeking to make the amendment this evening.
Okay.
That amendment.
Just, so a few other things. So we'll leave the marine strategy for now. Just in regards to the issues regarding, there's mention of extending the SBIA's involvement. This is under business initiatives. So again, actually, it identifies the SBIA as the lead for the marine industry.
Councillor O'Keefe, could you direct us to the page in the clause, please?
So it's business initiatives, marine industries,
Sorry, what page?
and that's page 7. And
Okay.
actually, maybe I'll leave that one for now as well, since we're gonna wait to hear from the marine industry.
Okay.
Anyways. And then the other thing that, that had to do with the marine sector. In regards to the, there was mention of the continuing to have the SBIA engaged with the business management development and expanding their geographical footprint in terms of providing support. So that's one thing that I would seek to have removed from the approach.
Okay, again, just, if you could help us, Councillor O'Keefe, on what page and what
I
clause?
think that was 3.3, 3.2. Yeah, at the bottom, so under, it's under business retention and expansion.
Sorry,
So-
just itemize the bullet?
So 3.3.2, and the bullet is, I guess the first bullet says consider ongoing funding to the SBIA to continue their business development programs beyond their geographical mandate. And so my motion would be to remove that from the approach.
Okay, we have a mover, do we have a seconder?
Second for discussion.
Okay, I'll turn to the mover.
And so my rationale for that is when we funded a business development position for the SBIA, that was in the context of COVID response and recovery. And we funded that out of COVID recovery funds from the province. And I think the SBIA did a good job at shepherding our local business community through the different types of funding that was available, different programs that they could tap into, and to help them respond and recover to COVID. We talked about cutting that off after 2 years. We decided to extend it for another year in the last budget cycle because we hadn't figured out what we were going to do with economic development at this time. In terms of, now we have an economic development strategy. There's other things that we want to do, and so I think there's better uses for that money. In addition, I think it's beyond our authority and the SBIA's, in fact, for us to expand their geographical mandate. So the SBIA was created by bylaw for a specific purpose and a specific geographical area, which is the downtown area, and their mandate is to support those businesses. So I don't think it's within our purview to say that we are going to give the SBIA a mandate beyond the geography that's set for them. So that's why I don't think that fits, and it's I think it should be removed from the general approach.
Okay, I'll turn to the seconder.
And just a question back to the mover for clarity. Are you removing the item or are you removing the lead? That's what I wanted to see, because I think the concept is important to retain. I'm not sure the SBIA, as you've outlined, is the right lead for it, because I don't know what their expertise in the marine industry.
If I could provide
Yeah.
clarification, is the motion on the floor that was moved and seconded was, with regards to the clause, consider ongoing funding to the SBA to continue to consider their business development programs beyond their geographic mandate area. That is the clause you're seeking to remove.
Yeah, okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
but to your point, there's a separate issue in regards to
Right.
your point as well, which we can talk about. But for now, I was just taking things in small bits and focusing on this.
Right. I
on
will
this.
support this motion as stated.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to
Point of
Councillor
order.
O'Toole.
Sorry, I'm not, we already had a motion on the floor, if I'm not mistaken. So what is this?
I turned to the seconder, and the seconder said he supports the motion on the floor. There
There's-
is.
Yeah, so I'm just lost. I'm getting tired, but I'm also lost at what we're doing
Okay,
right now.
so if I can provide clarification, Councillor O'Keefe moved the removal of the sentence that I just read, and Councillor Duck seconded it. Councillor O'Keefe then motivated it to it. I turned to Councillor Duck as the seconder, and he asked a clarification question and then said he supported the motion on the floor. So
we have two motions
Point
on
of
the floor
order.
now.
So Councillor O'Toole's right. There is a motion on the floor already, and we're overstepping it with another motion that is not an amendment to the motion. So it should become as a motion arising, as you indicated.
Sorry, this motion is to amend this plan.
That's right.
We are now speaking to an amending motion.
Thank you.
My apologies if I didn't provide that clarification earlier.
Yeah, but to clarify, the motion on the floor is that council endorse the approach to economic development outlined in this report. So now we're suggesting that it's okay to go through and wordsmith the approach or the specifics in here, I just want to know what the ground rules are.
We can, with a motion on the floor, amend the implementation approach which is this document. I would seek to staff otherwise. Okay. Sorry, Councillor Keefe has the floor, but I'm going to turn to Councillor Garnett if you have a question on this process.
Yeah, and on this particular, if that's okay, Mayor.
Okay, so you had the floor. Are you finished? You're finished. Councillor Duck is finished. Councillor O'Toole, are you finished? You raised a point of clarification. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff. I would love to hear from Mr. Newcomb on his feeling about that being included or removed as is being moved forward as the writer of this report.
I mean, in terms of 3.3.2 and delivering that action, I guess there's two options. One is we don't have the in-house capacity or expertise to do that. So one option is contracting it out to a third party. I guess the other option is continuing on with an organization that's been undertaking that action already. I mean, that's ultimately a council decision, so.
Thank you.
Leave it up to council.
Thank you, Mayor.
Certainly, Mr. Humble.
Thank you. So again, under the economic development strategy, which was adopted by council, we have a section entitled Business Retention and Expansion with the lead as the SBIA. We have a goal or an action contained within the economic development strategy under 3.3.2, which is establish and evaluate a pilot BRE program. To me, it clearly, logic leads that the lead on that is the SBIA to lead that BRE program. So to me, if we're talking about removing that bullet, it then speaks to, again, we're back to, are we amending then the economic development strategy, which was already approved by council? That's my question or concern.
Okay, so again, 3.3.2, establish and evaluate a pilot BRE program. The first dash underneath that is the town should fund the SBI to undertake an ongoing program, an ongoing BRE program. And then there's another direction to that. The bullets that Councillor Keefe is making reference to is consider ongoing funding to the BIA to continue their business development programs beyond their geographic mandate area. So the first one is speaking directly to the funding, and the second is with regards to a recommendation on the implementation beyond their mandated area. So, Councillor O'Keefe?
Yeah. So if I can clarify, so,
Well, that's what I hope I just did.
well, partly, but what I want to explain to my colleagues and to staff is there's a difference between a BRE program and what the SBIA has been doing in terms of business development. And so those are two separate things. And so if we're going to have a BRE program, that's something different than what has been going on. And we've identified, rightly or wrongly, that the town should fund SBIA to do that, but we haven't defined what that BRE program will be. And so that is why it's not to be assumed we're talking about ongoing funding for the business development. I presume that's a business development manager. If you looked at what was in the work description for the business development manager, which we funded out of COVID recovery funds, those functions were not business retention and expansion functions. Those were things to help businesses get through COVID and that sort of thing, but they are not business retention and expansion functions. So that's why I'm trying to distinguish between that. Okay, fine, if we still want to go ahead and do the SBIA to do a BRE program, that's one thing. And let's define what a BRE program is going to be, and that's the approach we should take. But we're also talking about we want them to do a BRE program, and we want to continue funding them for the business development program, which is different.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe.
Point of order. I'd like to propose a motion to refer.
Refer to where?
Refer to in the next council meeting. Because we're tired, we've got other items we can quickly do. We're going to go into a motion to extend the meeting if we get another 5 minutes. So I'm going to propose that I'd like to make a motion to refer this to a future council meeting.
Second.
Moved in second, discussion? I'm not in favor of referral. I haven't commented on this yet. I think one or two more comments and we can take a decision on this. If we want to amend this document further, yes, I would suggest referring it to it, but I think this is a point we can resolve fairly shortly. Further discussion, Councillor Novek.
I feel that the way 3.3.2.
No, we're not we're speaking to the referral motion, Councillor Novek.
All right.
Do you support referral?
No, I don't support referral because I think the way that clause is written, it's confusing. And I think that Councillor O'Keefe's motion will clarify it and refine it to where it should go.
You don't support, you're not speaking to the motion, you're speaking to the referral. You don't support the referral.
No, I don't support the referral because I agree that we should be able to resolve this quickly.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to call the question. All in favor of referral? Opposed? Councillor Novek, myself, Councillor Garnett, Councillor Duncan. I will speak for a first time, and then I can turn to other speakers. I don't support this amendment. The first word in the clause is consider. Council will not consider funding unless the BIA makes a presentation to Council requesting an extension of funding, and we can consider the request based on the merits of, or we can consider the funding request based on the merits of the request itself. I think this is unnecessary wordsmithing at this point. Any further discussion? On the motion to amend removing this clause, Councillor Novek.
I'm sorry, I did want to say something. I guess I didn't get my hand up quickly enough. I support the motion because I feel that the way this clause is written, the waters are a bit muddied. It's not clear to us what the SBIA is going to do. Are they going to expand or work on a BRE program, or are they gonna?
Councillor Novek, I'm going to interject. I tried to provide clarification to say the council would not be considering a funding request unless the BIA brought a proposal forward. We shouldn't infer anything into the BIA or what future funding might address until the BIA comes forward, if they come forward. So
Okay,
I'm not sure what
we're talking about an approach here, and I feel this clause muddies the approach.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Duck.
Yeah, I'm equally in favor of this amendment, because I think it takes it out of the realm of and clarifies as to what the objective is here. And I think that as Councillor O'Keefe noted, the work that the SBIA did, and this was through COVID and was to accomplish a task within that. So this is removing that opportunity for them to go forward, and I think that's what I would like to see. Thank you.
Sorry, I would see clarification through the staff is that, based on Councillor Duck's comments, if we remove this clause from this document, it does not prohibit the BIA from presenting a funding request to council. Thank you. Further discussion? I'll call a question on removing this clause from the document. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Duncan, Councillor Garnett, myself, and Councillor O'Toole. The motion is defeated. Councillor O'Keefe, you have the floor.
You know, I think I'll leave things at that. There's a number of things that I wanted to comment in regards to marine strategy and a few other things, but I think those are best left until we have an opportunity to hear from ABCMI. I'm wondering whether it would be appropriate, though, to add into the approach, or whether it's something that staff are going to do anyways, to invite the Association of BC Marine Industries to present to council sometime in the month of November or December. Whether I need to make a motion to that effect, or if that's something we can just set up.
Sorry, if I did understand from Mr. Newcomb, he indicated he was having a meeting with a representative of the organization?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm wondering whether you need us to say, yes, please invite him to come and to present to council. So I know that staff are meeting, but I think what I think is a good idea is for all of council to hear from ABCMI, and he requested to come and make a presentation. So I don't know if that requires a motion from council to invite him, or whether that's something you will do.
Having met the gentleman for approximately 2 minutes at a meeting and not having sat down with him and had a full meeting yet, we had not intended to invite him in the near term to speak, no.
So I think it's a good idea, so.
Sorry, Councillor O'Keefe, can I clarify?
Sure.
You've indicated a number of times that they have requested making a presentation to council. Is that correct?
Yes.
So,
Well, no, he's asked me. So I've met with him a few times, and he said, I'd like to come to council. And I said, and I informally talked to staff about that, and the idea was that we're gonna wait until the economic development strategy came out. And so it's out. I think it's a good idea. He would like to come and present. So I don't know if that requires a motion from council, or if you just want him to contact you directly and say, I want to present. Okay, done then. We're good.
thank you. So we're now on the main motion. Any further discussion? Sorry? I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. I'm going to turn to item 13D, which is results of the Street Market Bike Valet pilot project. I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report just provides an overview of the Bike Valet pilot project that ran for 11 Thursday night street market events during this past summer. Total of 228 bikes were stored by Capital Bikes during those 11 events, and the project came in fairly significantly under budget, about $3,000 out of the $5,000 budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Newcomb? Councillor Duck and Councillor Garnett?
Just through you, Mayor, to staff, is this a project we'll continue with future markets?
Through the Mayor to Councillor Duck, I think staff felt it had some potential. It probably could have used a little more advertising to raise awareness a little bit, but yeah, it seemed to be popular with those who used it, and you know, potentially with bigger events as well, it might be beneficial.
Councillor Garnett?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And through you, staff, please pass along my appreciation to Ms. Gilmar for bringing this forward and giving the trial period to see that it was successful. Just one question. As far as one-time large events, would we still be considering the same space for doing the valet service, or are there other areas that staff are considering?
Through the Mayor to Councillor Garnett, I think that might be on a case-by-case basis. It seemed to work out quite well with Anavets in the market, the Anavets site, but for different events, it's probably worth looking a little more broadly. And I will definitely pass on to Ms. Gilmar. She did a lot of work on this, and I can't take any credits. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Question through you to staff. So it sounds like it's good, and it would be a good thing to do in the future. So is it something that you are planning to bring forward at budget time to provide a valet service again for Thursday night market and perhaps for Canada Day events? So is that something you require direction from us to do, or is that something you're kind of thinking about doing anyways?
Through the Mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, no, we're just looking at options for that to bring forward to budget. So yeah, no motion necessary. We're just having some discussions about how to do it.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll just speak briefly. I'm supportive of this continuing through the market next year, also for Canada Day, and so staff bring that forward for consideration of budget. This is for information only, so we don't require a motion. I see no further discussion, so I will move on to 13E, which is the monthly building permit report. We're receiving that for information. By being on the agenda, there's no motion required. Do colleagues have any questions on the monthly building report? Seeing none, I'll turn to our one single item of correspondence, and that is the letter from the Sidney Community Association. Councillor Duck, you requested raising this to item 14A under correspondence. Please.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I thought it was important to bring this forward to Council above just information basis, both from hearing in our public presentation from the SCA and giving them some sort of direction and responses, what we feel about their recommendations, but also to bring it forward for consideration in the strategic planning session that we will be having. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. So that's not providing any direction. If I can...
I can if you wish.
Well, I have a comment to make beforehand. So this is a request from the Sidney Community Association on two particular items. A recommendation I was going to suggest to Council is that Mr. Humble and myself could meet with representatives from the Sidney Community Association. On these points, I have some further questions of clarification, and we would provide a letter of reply, which would then come back to Council at a future meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. We do have the remaining 7 items of correspondence for information. They were received by virtue of being our agenda this evening. We won't address them specifically. We have no notices of motion or motion to go on camera. I would seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you, colleagues. We are adjourned, and thank you to staff.